And we are on the air. Tonight I am joined with Ray Murasame and a Twitter mutual known as Heartless. Would everybody like to introduce yourselves, starting with you, Ray?
Yeah, so people may be familiar with me already, but um, you can find me on Twitter at @RayMurasame, and um,
Oh,
I
let
I
me
I
just fix that audio issue. There,
okay.
let's try that again. Sorry.
What was I doing wrong?
Nothing. You did nothing wrong. The issue was that I had YouTube accidentally open in another tab and there was the sound
Oh, so it
playing.
was giving you the echo thing. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, so I was gonna say, yeah, so you all might know me already, but you can find me at @RayMurasame on Twitter, and I promote um, socialist feminism and third worldism. I've been a commentator on political issues for several years now, and I was a member of the Labour Party up until just recently.
Mm.
Damn.
And now to you, Heartless.
Oh, me. I'm just, your friendly neighborhood anarchist, communist. Yes, that'll work.
Well, in any case, I'm sure we're all very pleased to meet you. Um, but today we are here to talk about a certain spineless specimen known as Kier Starmer, um, who has recently taken UK Labour in a rather interesting um, direction. Now, Ray Murasame, I think you, as a resident of the UK,
Yes.
um, and former member of the Labour Party, are more qualified than anyone here to talk about this. But to give my audience a brief rundown, Keir Starmer has done the classic sort of thing that, if you are an American, you might be more familiar with the Democratic Party doing, where they will campaign in the primary to the left and then campaign in the election, and after that, to the right. So, what Keir Starmer is doing has been finessing certain issues, namely trans rights, um, a minimum
Oh,
wage, and um, I think also Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
oh, that.
Basically everything. And um, I think the motivation behind why they're doing this is because they seem to be stunned by what happened in 2019 um, when Jeremy Corbyn's Labour lost the election to Boris Johnson. And the lesson they seem to have taken away from that was that you can't do things that Labour would ordinarily do because you'll never get elected. And so what you need to do is you need to cleave back to some kind of strange signaling about family and patriotism. The words he actually started using himself, because he said he wanted a platform that was about drawing closer to family, patriotism, and something else. I can't remember what it was. But that sort of thing. And it sounds like really insincere coming from his mouth when he says it, and it just looks extremely weird. And so, you've got this whole problem of them constantly running from their own shadow, if you want to put it that way. Because if you look at what happened in 2019, you see a manifesto was put together that contained a lot of different ideas that were curated by a lot of different interest groups within the Labour Party, which all came into this one manifesto. Keir Starmer himself was physically present when that manifesto was drafted up. This is something that even during the conference just this week, this topic came up where Keir Starmer himself disclaimed the 2019 manifesto, implying that it was not a serious plan for government. Interesting that he would say that, given that he was physically present and didn't voice any objections to it. John Trickett actually took to Twitter and said that he sat through the whole meeting that agreed the 2019 manifesto, and that he was just meters away from Keir Starmer, and that every single policy at that time was agreed unanimously. And so, despite how that means that Keir Starmer himself agreed to the 2019 manifesto as part of that unanimous agreement, no private objections were made at that point. Um, but it went the way that it went. And so then Keir Starmer had to sort of do a magical reinvention of his perspective. Or perhaps he was just going along with what was happening previously and always had a different idea. Who knows? But now he's kind of reinvented himself and reinvented the Labour Party and decided to call it, Labour under new leadership, as though what he is doing is in some way new, as opposed to it being some kind of very hodgepodge made up on the spur of the moment, harkening back to 1997 attempt. And, there are a lot of people, even in the title of this stream, well, not the title of the stream, but in the title that you tweeted out earlier for the description of this, you described it as a Blairite maneuver that he's engaged in. Well, I mean, I've been saying something far worse than that. I've been saying that this is not even a Blairite maneuver, or a Brownite maneuver for that matter. This is something to the right of that, in the sense that what Blair and Brown were doing in 1997 was seen as new and innovative at the time that they did it, whereas what he's doing now is some stale, like, revisiting of a thing that you can't bring back, except they're doing it in a way that's almost like a reaction to defeat, in a way that Tony Blair and Gordon Brown could never have done. For example, you can never imagine Tony Blair getting onto a stage, for example, and saying that we need to take the Labour Party back to having conversations about what was it, family and patriotism. Like, I don't
That
think he would say it in that blunt of a way, because it would be way too, what's the word for it? It would be way too in your face. It would be almost like he's on the defensive for some reason. Tony Blair didn't do that. When Tony Blair was running in 1997, he ran on basically calling the Tories sleazy, and saying that he is the only person who'd be competent enough to actually lead this country. And also, there's that famous speech, actually, well, not even a speech, a heckling moment in Parliament, where Tony Blair puts both of his hands across the dispatch box and grips it with both hands and leans across to into John Major's face and called him weak, weak, weak. And that was the thing that was repeated back and forth on television constantly. So if you take that and you compare it to the way that Keir Starmer's been behaving, they're two completely different people in that regard. Because Tony Blair was constantly on the offensive. Keir Starmer, by contrast, is constantly on the defensive against, sort of any random right-wing Twitter personality who might be offended by something he said yesterday.
An interesting thing about Keir Starmer is that he seems to have embraced what is often called the blue Labour perspective, and this aroused, I think, in 2010. But the thing is, he seems to have managed to take the worst of blue Labour, namely its concern for patriotism, family values, aka anti-woman, anti-LGBT policy, but removed any focus on nationalization and economic development and investment
Very
that was
convenient.
emphasized, or any form of even moderate anti-capitalist critique. It's all been discarded.
Yeah, now it's kind of like, the Keir Starmer approach seems to be basically, don't speak too negatively of the existing system, which is kind of a weird contradiction to have in the middle of a pandemic in which the champions of that system have failed so badly on every metric. I mean, there are so many thousands of excess deaths in the United Kingdom, which are caused by the fact that this is a party which, and by this is a party, I mean the Conservative Party in this case. The Conservative Party is a party which is so craven in its behaviour that they actually placed GDP growth, wage growth, all of these things they've placed ahead of actually public health outcomes. In fact, on the news just today, or is it yesterday, depending on which time zone you want to be in, Boris Johnson himself went out there and literally said that he places wage growth ahead of, in concern versus cancer, COVID-19, any other form of public health. He thinks that wage growth is more important than all of those things. So in other words, we're at a point where basically just worship the GDP figure as it goes up or down, depending on how badly the economy is being hammered at any given time. I mean, we're in a country right now where.
Pardon, Heartless, what were you trying to say?
Well, I'm a bit behind. I'm just wondering who this Sterner guy is. Did he come after Corbyn?
Yes, he
Indeed.
did.
Keir
I'm a
Starmer
bit behind.
Keir Starmer was the Labour leader who was elected to replace Jeremy Corbyn after he resigned following his 2019 defeat.
Oh, man.
And so yeah, it's been a steady walking backwards that whole time. I mean, we're now at the point in the UK where if you live in some rural parts of the country, or like by the seaside, for example, and you try to go to a petrol station, there is no petrol, or at least no petrol for you, right? And so, this is stuff that should be easy should be easy wins for any Labour leader to come in and basically say, well, we have an explanation as to why this is happening. It's because these people have just spent the entirety of the pandemic doing nothing except catering to what's going on in the City of London and ignoring the actual people who need to live in this country. That's all they have to do. But instead, we've had this weird, wishy-washy kind of defensiveness going on, where Kier Starmer will come up, he will say something non-committal, he will then be asked to walk it back, he will then be asked to condemn the Labour Party for something it's done in its past. I mean, even at conference, you saw these weird genuflections to like the need to have additional diversity training, and the need to have like more self-examination on stuff that they think that they've done wrong, etc., etc. There's the Conservative Party, which is having its conference in the coming week. Like, are they going to have any of these self-recriminations going on at their conference? Of course not. They're going to come out there and they're going to grandstand atop the bodies of everyone who has died in COVID-19 so far. That's what they're going to do, and no one's going to call them to hold them to account for that.
Labour has become a rather masochistic party, I think, obsessed with like lashing itself over the back, as you said. And I think, this is a response to the media criticism that Jeremy Corbyn endured during his leadership, which, of course, England has one of the most notoriously rabid right-wing presses in all of Europe. Who's that media fellow who owns Sun News, I think it is, and all its subsidiaries? Yes.
Is it Murdoch?
I think so. Anyway, he and his ilk have a massive grip over the public conversation because of this, really right-wing media. And I think that did play a factor in Jeremy Corbyn's loss in 2019. There's a lot of things going on there. However, I don't think that Boris Johnson in this present moment, when the UK has one of the worst death totals per capita in the world, and just not per capita, he's not a difficult leader to run against.
Indeed, he should not be a difficult leader to run against because he's literally incompetent. I mean, this is stuff that was pointed out before the election, right? Jeremy Corbyn did an actually decent job of pointing out how incompetent Boris Johnson was, but not only that, people within the Conservative Party did a very good job of pointing out how incompetent Boris Johnson was. I mean, I remember the times when we were doing contrast between Theresa May and Boris Johnson, and the difference between Theresa May and Boris Johnson was that Theresa May actually knows what she's talking about. She listens in meetings with civil servants, or at least attempts to. She has a sense of public duty and responsibility, where basically even if she's doing something wrong, she will do that wrong thing competently through to the end. Boris Johnson, by contrast, members of the civil service went to the press anonymously and said, party elections and all this party-related squabbling aside, Boris Johnson is objectively bad at doing public service because he doesn't pay attention in meetings. He literally falls asleep. He'll come in halfway through and be like, well, so what are we talking about today? Or he'll literally just like zone out for the entirety of a meeting, and then at the end of it just be like, okay, so everyone knows what to do, right? And then just walks out, right? This kind of behavior, where basically the civil service is essentially having to carry him halfway or 3/4 of the way through everything because he doesn't actually make real decisions, is not leadership. That's like I don't even know what to call that. It's the kind of entitlement that you see from like extremely wealthy people who went to Eton, and I'm playing that card, yes. Extremely wealthy people who went to Eton who think that basically it is their birthright to be able to lead the United Kingdom, and so they don't have to actually put in the effort when they get into the office. And this has been his behaviour throughout the time that he's been in government. And then so no one should be really surprised that then when he becomes Prime Minister, he just behaves the exact same way again.
The problem, though, is the UK media is not framing it like that. It seems to bend over backwards in some instances to praise Boris Johnson, especially when they were contrasting him with Jeremy Corbyn, trying to efface all of his anti-Semitic remarks. And they completely dropped the ball on holding him to
the
task.
conclusion that they feared Corbyn more, and this caused them to pretend that they couldn't see all of Boris Johnson's glaring flaws because they had finally found something that in their view was worse than Boris Johnson, a person who might actually make them pay taxes.
Yes, heavens forbid. But the thing is, Boris Johnson still maintains this commanding lead in the polls because instead of a Labour leader that is trying to puncture this sort of faux populist mystique that Boris Johnson has created around himself, we have a rather limp UK press that instead seems to be obsessed with rows in Labour that are caused by Corbyn's weak leadership and failure to take any sort of stand against bigotry. In fact, any sort of stand at all, because he said, well, I'm willing to compromise on promises if it means getting elected. That was a headline I read. Why would
Unbelievable.
anyone vote for someone like that?
Unbelievable. I mean, this is the kind of stuff where it's like you almost look at it and you think, is he trying to lose on purpose? Like, why would a person do that?
Wait,
Mhm.
didn't Boris also like call a bunch of people drunks or something?
Oh yes, he actually insulted. Yeah, Boris Johnson did actually insult working class people directly. And this is another thing. This is another thing that about the UK, which is actually genuinely like ridiculous to watch, right?
Mhm.
And it's that this for populism thing that goes on, it doesn't seem to actually make any logical sense. Like as soon as you actually start to think about it. So the idea is, according to the tabloid press, is that Labour is somehow out of touch with, I don't know, the thoughts that exist inside of working class people's brains, which, I mean, that's entirely possible. But then
Well,
I don't
especially
understand how
now.
they. Yeah, I mean, but the thing is, I don't understand how they get from Jeremy Corbyn may or may not be out of touch to Boris Johnson is in touch. Because if you go to like statements made by Boris Johnson, he is an individual who claimed that the working class people in the north of England are all drunk people who are having children out of wedlock and who can't be trusted with their vote or whatever, right? So, like, I'm not sure. I mean, in fact, not that I'm not sure, because I remember there was a live stream a million years ago where there was a conversation I was having. It was a right-wing live stream, unfortunately, and I was making this precise point. Actually, I was saying, why do people feel as though Boris Johnson is speaking to them when the way that he's speaking to them is to directly insult them through the newspaper that he used to write for, right? And
Well,
so I
you
read the quotation out. And people came on to defend it by saying that they would like to own that insult. In other words, the people who were being insulted came on and said that they respected Boris Johnson for insulting them to their face because who else would tell it like it is? It's almost like the voters themselves are masochistic, so they want to be ruled over by people who spit in their face.
Well, that's something you can also see in Donald Trump. Remember, he said, "How stupid are the people of Iowa?" And then they gave him,
And then they gave him their votes.
yeah.
Very, very similar to the West Virginia thing as well, where Boris Johnson in 1990, sorry, Boris Johnson, Donald Trump was on record in 1999, I think it was 1993, maybe I can't remember which year it was, but he was on the record and he never recanted this position, where he said that the people who work in coal mines and in other industries related to digging things out of the ground in West Virginia, that they are somehow, what is it? They are somehow foolish and doomed by history because they haven't seen that the writing is on the wall for that particular type of industry, and so they deserve what they're getting, i.e., lung diseases, right? Now, the thing that I found interesting about how that ended up playing out was that later Democrats were accused of holding that position during the 2016 election, even though they
Mhm.
hadn't actually said that aloud. So it's very interesting how that plays out. And the West Virginians then came out and were like, "We love Donald Trump. Thank you for like insulting everyone to their face, right?" And so the same thing
Tells it
happens in
like
the
it
UK,
is.
where people will come in and they'll just say, "Yeah, I love and I own that insult." Now, of course, does Labour learn anything from this? Because you would think that if this is a dynamic that keeps playing out, you would think that Jeremy Corbyn's confrontational style. So, for example, that time when the BBC asked him whether he would still be around for future elections, and he like pointed at the screen and said, "Have I not made myself clear?" And he does that. You know how Jeremy Corbyn has that particular way of acting aggrieved, but not in a sort of fake way, but in like an absolutely angry way.
Yeah.
So the thing I found interesting was that he had actually got that down to a science where he was capable of basically like insulting people in specific ways that would cause them to still want to vote for him, right?
Mhm.
Keir Starmer does none of this. Keir Starmer is 100% doormat apology and it's not working, right? So you would think to yourself that rather than trying to, quote, detoxify the Labour Party by becoming a doormat, they should have just gone on the offensive as well. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn went on the offensive. It didn't quite work out because of the fact that people decided they wanted to be offended in a different way by Boris Johnson instead. But
Mhm.
I just don't get this appeal to politeness politics, particularly since the right never really plays by those rules anyway. Right? They'll just go on Twitter and be like, "Oh, why aren't you adhering to a kinder, gentler politics?" And of course, my response would always be, "Well, I'll start when they do."
Yeah.
Right?
It's always, you have to surrender first. Um, and then when, of course, they inevitably don't follow, they'll still find stories of random left-wing people who are doing it. Oh, look at this outraged college student who is offended that racism is this thing. Aren't they stupid for being offended and protesting?
Mm.
You
Like
know,
even now, what you saw what happened to Angela Rayner just 2 days ago as well, where she was in some speech where someone had recorded her. It wasn't really a speech. I think it may have been a conversation or something. I don't know whether it was an official capacity or not because I haven't actually seen the full footage. But basically,
mhm.
I think she described the existing Tory government as people who are scum, and like the media lost it. We've had an entire week. We've had an entire week of just non-stop back-to-back stories on how is it appropriate to call someone scum. And I'm just thinking, um, I, I, I'm pretty sure that like everyone in the Conservative Party has used harsher words to describe political opponents over the course of the past 10 years, like on a daily basis. But now we're having like an entire week of recriminations over whether someone in the Labour Party should be able to describe Boris Johnson or Michael Gove as scum.
Yeah, it's
Like,
very
what do they have to
clear
do in
double
order to not?
standards.
Exactly, it's a very clear double standard. And also, what do they have to do in order to? I mean, what would they have to do in order to earn the title of scum? Because, like, at this point, they're already standing atop a large number of deaths. They've scrapped the bill that should have actually, dealt with dealing with child trafficking and stuff like this. They presided over a metropolitan police department that was able to, allow misogynists and like a guy whose nickname was quote and content warning for everyone, of course, a guy whose nickname was quote the rapist to essentially walk around and murder Everard while using his police badge as the way to get into her as a way to get her handcuffed and so on. They have sat there while there was no protective equipment at the beginning of the pandemic for NHS workers. They provided insufficient um, protective equipment for all manner of people. They allowed COVID-19 to enter care homes and just destroy large amounts of old people, for example, and then privately laughed about it. I mean, I thought, like, at what level do they earn the ability to be called scum so that someone can say, perhaps these guys might be scum without having 5 days of recriminations and like self-examinations and sort of media appearances of like, very concerned, very deeply concerned hosts asking, so do you think it was appropriate that Angela Rayner in a private conversation described the Prime Minister as scum? Or people around the Prime Minister or members of the cabinet as scum, or perhaps just people in the Conservative Party in general
What is
as
all
scum.
a scumbag?
I mean, you
That's
didn't
Mm.
even
what.
say scumbag, just regular scum.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, um, why don't we call civility politics political correctness? Because that's what it is under any other
Yeah, that's
name.
basically what it is, yeah.
But the thing is, they will never accept that framing because the only time political correctness becomes an issue, it's when marginalized groups are trying to mobilize around protecting their rights and identities from verbal or physical
Yeah,
abuse. Um, but when it happens to be about protecting the feelings of right wing spokesmen, oh, suddenly the national conversation is so charged. Why can't there be a nicer, kinder politics?
exactly. I mean, I saw one just the other day, since you're speaking about marginalized groups as well. I saw that there was someone who put out a screenshot of something that I think Graham Linehan wrote on Instagram or something like that, where he was like directly insulting someone for like no apparent reason, and he'd done this in like in a particularly egregious way. So I won't repeat what he said, but what he said was something that was like extremely insulting to that particular person, and no
Yeah.
one came into the comments like, "Oh, um, is this an acceptable form of discourse to have in politics where you just randomly insult someone for no reason?" No, no one even asked that question. And if anyone's like, "Oh, this is inappropriate," then suddenly it's like, "Oh, now we're having political correctness." So, yeah, you're absolutely right. That basically, as soon as someone from a marginalized group perhaps asks a question about about the tenor of conversation that's going on, oh no, it's fine. Everyone's crazy for thinking there's something wrong here. And then as soon as someone who is in power gets insulted, then it's suddenly like, okay, we need to have a 5-day examination as to where the national conversation has gone.
Exactly. And remember the whole undateable Tory thing?
Yes, I remember that one as well. That was hilarious, where they were so offended that people were trending that.
Well, hey, there's a pretty simple fix to the problem of women not wanting to date Tories. Just stop being a
Stop being a
Tory.
Tory. Exactly. You just say, have you guys considered stopping? So I mean, it is something else. I mean, we've also got. Let me see, because I had other things on this list as well.
Would you like to play the little video that we
Oh
you
yes, I
sent me
remember that now.
earlier?
Yep, we could do that. But show the tweet as well. But also, I want to just quickly check and find out what's happened to.
Certainly, this is a I don't know what's happened to her. You can
Yeah,
give
I'll
me a
check for
little.
Marcus's internet connection. I think that her internet has died or something. I'll just quickly message her while you do that. Hold on.
All good.
Okay, so I've put, if your internet died, tell us, and then she'll probably message me back.
There we go. And oh, yeah,
She has
they
come back
seem
now.
to, she seems to be coming back. There we go. Are you
Damn, I'm
present?
sorry.
It's all
That
right.
must have been me.
It happens to the best of us.
What'd I miss?
We were just
we were talking about
criticizing.
civility politics and how weirdly no one calls it political correctness when right wingers start crying about being called mean words.
It's true. Cancel culture! But then they're like, we want to cancel this right now.
Mm-hmm. Yes, specifically, all the people who are criticizing me should never be allowed to speak again.
LOL.
All
How
right.
do you criticize my criticizement? It's my freedom of speech.
All right. Can everybody see this?
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
So here we go. This is a tweet from Matt Zarb Cousin. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah.
Starmer goes back from backing McDonald workers demanding $15 an hour to sacking anti-McDonald for demanding $15 an hour. Looking forward to him gesturing at the screen next time he's on Mar, exclaiming there's no inconsistency as he only meant $15 an hour for McDonald's workers.
And that was on September the 27th. And then by the 30th, here we are.
And it's at full volume.
You may have to
so we
raise
can
the volume
appreciate
up
this.
since the clip itself is quiet, so you might have to raise the whole thing up.
It's going to be nice and loud, don't worry. Or as loud as I can make it.
Minimum wage. This is something that you've gone back on yourself now. So much so that one of your shadow front bench colleagues, Andy McDonald, has resigned because of this, because he refuses to argue against the idea of a £15 minimum wage. That's something that you campaigned on, to be called leader, to be voted in as leader, and you've changed your mind on that. Those young people you were talking about in Blackpool, so proud of where they live, so proud to be able to stay there, and understanding that actually they may have to move away. £15 minimum wage may well allow them to stay where they are.
Well, a couple of things on that. Firstly, the particular campaign I was supporting there was the campaign in relation to the McDonald's workers. And I know McDonald's, and I know that they can afford a £15 minimum wage. But the point this week was not should it be £15 in this particular business. It was, when we look at the economy as a whole, as an incoming Labour government, how do we balance the economy? And it was that credible approach. The other thing I'd say, you mentioned the Blackpool people in Blackpool,
and the rest of it is not relevant, but I mean, that was truly incredible. Like, literally, he did the thing that people predicted would be the most ridiculous possible thing he could do, which was, when questioned on how he could support £15 an hour in the first instance and then magically oppose it today, his explanation was, oh, well, technically he never did that. He was just supporting £15 an hour for those specific McDonald's workers in that specific McDonald's in that specific region of the UK.
So Not even every McDonald's worker in the
Yeah,
UK.
it turns out it's not even every McDonald's worker, it's just McDonald's in that region.
This just keeps getting worse. This is getting worse and worse.
It's the most ridiculous thing I had ever heard. I was just looking at that and thinking, how are we actually at a point where the Labour leader is doing that? Now, I mean, people could argue that, okay, perhaps Jeremy Corbyn painted with broad brushes on occasion, right? But better to paint
Yeah.
with a broad brush and be seen as not talking nonsense than to be sketching around the edges in one region of the UK while trying to walk back a previous statement you made while you posed with people who were holding up signs saying £15 an hour. Like, I mean, unbelievable.
I mean, like at this point, who's pleased? If you're opposed to a 15 pound wage per hour, then you're not going to believe Kier Starmer because he was protesting with people with signs that
Who were
clearly
holding up the
say
sign saying that.
15 pounds per hour. And if you're someone who supports a $15 pound per hour minimum wage,
You no longer believe him because now he's giving a very curious explanation as to how he can stand at your protest while not actually supporting a word you've said.
So, really, Kier Starmer has found a magical and brilliant way of pleasing absolutely no one on the minimum wage debate.
Galaxy.
Home
Galaxy
improvement
centrism.
noise?
Pardon?
Say again?
Is it home improvement noise?
Oh,
Oh, like it's pretty funny.
Mm,
I mean, literally, this is galaxy centrism.
yeah. Like, it's centrism that I might design if I wanted to parody centrism.
Yeah.
If I wanted
Which
to
is
write...
which I think is what Matt Zarb Cousins thought he was doing until it actually happened. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
that was supposed to be like a parody thing. Like that would be the most parodical thing that he could possibly come out and do. And then he's like, yeah, give me 3 days. I'm on that.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I can't... I'm almost afraid to see what he'll surrender on next. One of the more disturbing things, at least for me as a trans woman, is his seeming policy of removing trans people from the 2010 Equality Act, specifically when it comes to trans people's access to women's spaces.
I've heard a lot of conversation about like various aspects of this that have been debated within the Labour Party, and what's been going on there has been, let's say, shameful, in the sense that they managed to take something that should have been just a cut and dry, like obvious thing that had already been put into law and had already been dealt with in the previous generation of leadership. So they didn't even have to reopen that box to get tangled up in the mess of what was in the box. They could have just said, this is a settled matter in law already. Leave it alone. What has happened, and the box will remain untouched. If I were Labour leader, that's what I would have done. Like, I would have just been like, well, if
why
everybody's
didn't
happy
it
with
go
what's
that
already
way?
happened previously, there's no reason for me to modify that. And then I'd have just moved on. But unfortunately, we can't. Unfortunately, that can't be allowed to happen because Labour has to engage in self-recrimination and self-criticism. And so now, when like weird right-wing trolls backed by American evangelicals behind another front organization, comes in and says, "Well, we have a problem with this because you're not homophobic enough yet." And you've not like entered into a level of transphobia that hasn't been explored yet. Then Labour's kind of like, oh yeah, we're suddenly magically receptive to that bizarre conversation for no apparent reason, and we're just gonna have that conversation internally until everyone hates each other. Now, here's the interesting part. Internally, the Conservative Party is not having this conversation. The Conservative Party already knows exactly what they're doing on that issue.
Yeah. It seems like there's a weird niche of British centrism, you know, the J.K. Rowling type, Jess Phillips, Rosie Duckfield, that is particularly susceptible to transphobia.
Yeah. And the thing about it is I don't know what it is, whether it's like a solipsism or whether it's like a failure of education or whether it's like a failure of like the ability to parse information, because I think we already knew from like years ago that the Family Research Council and other groups within the Anglo-American context were trying to find a way to basically create trouble amongst the left by taking something that was already settled and understood, which is that there's an acronym. It says LGBT, and all four of these things are within this particular acronym and are mutually codependent on each other in terms of their theoretical interlockings and so on and so forth. And all of this was worked out long before our time by theorists who are much older than us, some of which are no longer even alive. And they looked at that and said, okay, how can we weaken this movement, because it's reaching a point where it's kind of like eroding the patriarchy and stuff. So how can we weaken this movement? And they were like, okay, what if we just put a wedge between the first three letters of the acronym and the last letter of the acronym? Just put a wedge there, let them fight each other.
Trans rights first.
Say it again.
Attacking trans rights first.
Yes. That basically their idea was to attack trans rights first, get everyone caught up in that nonsense, and then
Wasn't there
once
not a bunch of groups that were funding this?
that's what I
Like-
was saying. Yes, that Family Research Council and other right-wing groups that are associated with the United States, for example, started pushing money into these weird AstroTurf organizations that were pushing
Politicians
this
too, I
narrative.
think.
Social media as well was filled with like weird bots talking about this kind of topic constantly, and constantly recycling the same talking points in the same articles and so on, collaborating with members of the alt-right and so on, and slipstreaming this whole thing in. And then of course they ran into like one problem that a person would run into if they were running this kind of operation, which is you can't get massive social traction if you can't get women to buy into the thing that you're trying to sell. So the idea was, okay, how do they market it in such a way that it appears to be feminism? Well, easy. What you do is you take existing grievances that women have and you package them as actually this is not men doing this to you, it's somehow magically trans women who are doing this to you. Then you put that out there, and of course the same level of obsessiveness which has been going on for a long time in British politics when it comes to like gender issues in general. Now, all of these wheels that would have been spinning and going forward are now spinning in a ditch, talking about that one issue over and over again. And so, of course, you get like your authors and so on. So you get your J.K. Rowlings, you get all these other people to get like bizarrely involved in this single issue monomania, constantly going around and around and around on this issue. And they're there for like 5 years, possibly a decade if you let them. They'll keep bringing that one issue up over and over again. Also, the other thing is I look at the age range of the people, because another way to spot AstroTurf and time wasting is to spot the age range of the people who keep bringing it back. Almost everyone who is doing this nonsense are people who are within the generation that Graham Linehan is presently in, which is people who are just boomers or older. Right? That kind of generation where they're already retired, they're not having to actually go out and do a job. They're not having to actually participate in the economy because they're just collecting money they've saved up already, or they're receiving a pension from the rest of the taxpayers. And so they can sit on social media all day long, coming up with increasingly new narratives as to why everyone needs to pay attention to them.
And it's so vitriolic and so selectively focused. Like, we hear nothing about underfunded women's centers. We hear nothing about the danger the Met Police pose to women. It's trans, 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 24/7.
We also saw an interesting thing developing on 4chan, which is a weird place to look to on this issue, I know, but on 4chan you also saw people in the far right who were basically, slipstreaming this stuff into feminist spaces, coming up with interesting strategies of like, if they're doing this stuff, how can they also get them some racism in there at the same time? Because they were trying to figure like, how can we get this thing to do everything? Because it was already doing one thing, which is basically bringing feminism into disrepute, getting feminists to fight other feminists, and having the LGBT community having a constant back and forth dialogue with itself over a complete AstroTurf topic that had already been settled 5 to 10 years previously before they re-brought it back into the public space. So now they're thinking to themselves, okay, how can we get women of different ethnic groups to fight each other at the same time as well? And so their idea was, oh, well, what if they just went around accusing every woman of color of being trans for no apparent reason? Because they don't fit within the white beauty standard of what a quote-unquote British woman is supposed to look like. And so then they go around saying, oh, we can always tell when you're trans, and then they just get it wrong every single time anyway, because whatever, right? So they've been doing that. And so this is why, if you like go on Twitter right now, and you were to say go to like, I don't know, Afro-Caribbean Twitter, or you were to go to Asian British Twitter or something like this, and ask like, out of all of you, how many of you have been randomly accused by an anonymous person of being trans when you're not? You'd probably get like 60 to 75% of hands going up, right? Of people who are actually cis women who have just been accused of being trans because that fits part of some narrative. Like you annoyed a white man one day and then he decided you were trans because why not? Right?
Yeah. That's a very accurate thing, and that does one thing. It becomes, oh well, trans becomes an insult as opposed to just an identity that anyone can have. And the other work it does is, of course, you are not a proper woman because you do not fit within my standards of femininity. So it's
Exactly.
doing transphobia. It's doing racism. It's doing misogyny because it's women who do not fit within this certain confined gender role, who
That's
don't wear
right.
the dresses, who don't wear the lipstick, who don't wear the makeup, who aren't perfectly aligned with outdated ideals of femininity.
And some of this stuff isn't even stuff you can make yourself align with, because I mean, if they're doing it from the racial angle, there's some stuff they're asking of you that you can't do because your face won't do it because it can't, right?
Mhm.
And so it's one of those things where, like, for example, let's say they decide tomorrow that like you can't be a quote real woman unless you have a high nose. Well, interesting job at just like ruling out every single Asian woman or 90% of Asian women who exist. Like, we're not going to have high noses. It's not like part of the physiognomy that we've actually given, right? So this is
Yeah.
one of those ridiculous things.
Yeah. Another one of those ridiculous things, I'd say, is oh boy, remember the when they went after that cis woman in Olympic sports?
Yes.
Yes.
That's the one they reserve specifically for athletes of African descent, where they'll go after
They
them and say,
forced her
okay,
to do
well,
estrogen, yo. That's
yeah,
not cool.
they literally forced the woman to defend her own to defend her own identity like a
Because
million
a bunch
times
of
over.
white manifestors are like, oh, she's got too much testosterone somehow. That makes it unfair. It's like, that's just how her body is. Why don't you get over it? Fucking
Yeah,
God.
I saw a lot of quote tweets of like people who were indignantly pushing back when they started doing that, and people were just like, "Well, you know what this is called? This is just called being African." Like, I don't know what they want, right? So it was extremely weird.
Mm.
In
And
fact, on that point as well, I even had an instance, because the other one that they'll do with you as well is if you question the things that they do while they're doing them. So let's say you catch them doing that specific form of racist misogyny at the same time as they're engaged in it, and you intervene. When you intervene on them, they'll just spread out the same thing and put it onto you as well. So eventually, you'll have like a ridiculous Twitter thread with like one British woman hopping around in circles accusing every other woman who's attacking her or criticizing what she just did of also being somehow in on the grand conspiracy.
Isn't the main argument like, I don't know, trans women aren't safe to be in the same spaces because of
That's the
biases
yeah,
on
that's the
men,
other thing.
even
Yeah, I
though
mean
they're
that's
not?
the other thing that they bring as well. Yes, it is also that they often will say this as their justification as to why they
If I
want to urgently
remember
bring this topic
right,
to everyone's attention.
they reacted to that very fast with a study, like literally about bathrooms. I wonder if I could find it. It's hard in this mobile state, but they did. It
Depends
was
on
like
which study you're talking
just a
about,
few
because
years
there was
back. It was a few years back when there was all this blow up about, should trans women go into women's bathrooms. It was like,
which had
well,
already been happening.
right,
indeed.
right. It had already been happening, but now it was a big deal for all of a sudden because TERFs. And so, fuck, where's my mind going with this? Oh, yeah, the study. So basically, it forced these people to do a study, like a literal study. They did, um, you know, the chances of, I guess, content warning word rape, if you're going to get raped in a bathroom. And they did statistics on trans women, but also cis women and cis men in another
Mhm.
bathroom. They actually found out that, like, basically there were no instances ever of trans women ever doing anything like that, which didn't surprise me because they're already a rare population, and they're like marginalized. It'd be rare for them to. There's bad apples in every group, but like, you know what I mean? But the study also said that you were more likely to be raped by a cis woman in your own bathroom. So it was really kind of
Interesting.
sad. And in fact, there was even a higher chance of a man, like a cis man, just coming out of his bathroom, walking into the women's bathroom and raping you. Like,
But
literally.
you see, we're not allowed to talk about that because that would be offensive to conservatives, apparently.
Yeah, hashtag not all men. That's stigmatizing
Exactly.
masculinity. But
Exactly.
oh my
This
goodness,
is where we are now.
I actually ran into a weird argument on Twitter, sort of related to that, where this one guy was throwing turf rhetoric at my face, and he's like basically saying all men are rapists. Like, well, wouldn't you count among that? Like, aren't you a man? And he's like, well, no. And then the other turfs are defending him, saying, well, he doesn't try to invade women's spaces. And I'm just like, well, how do you know?
yeah.
They weren't catching on, but
Exactly.
I don't know. I guess cis men have been redeemed slightly these days for turfs because they don't want to be women. I
That
don't.
reminds me of when there was this feminist group whose name I've forgotten now, where their leaders all blocked me on Twitter or something because they were doing this thing where it was like some guy was running some hashtag. What was it? I think it was a hashtag that was written in Scottish Gaelic or something, and it said something like "men won't stay silent," right? And all these women were boosting this "men won't stay silent" concept, and they were supposedly feminists. And so I went and looked at this "men won't stay silent" concept, and it's basically men wanting to criticize trans women for some nonsense that I couldn't precisely figure out. So I was like, okay, can someone explain to me in this thread, given that there were a whole bunch of women of European descent all crowded into this thread, backing this thing? And I was like, can someone in this thread explain to me why it is that you all are taking cues and leadership from a man on this issue? And it turns out that the thing that he's actually talking about is that he just doesn't want to be in spaces where trans women are or something. Can anyone explain this to me? And so this is what I got back as a response: subtle racism. And yes, subtle racism, some weird misogyny, and then block. So I'm kind of thinking, kind of a self-explaining answer as to what part of this is feminism. None of it. So there we go.
Yeah.
And the thing is, I wasn't even doing that as a setup to because I had already drawn a conclusion. I genuinely wanted to see what their explanation was going to be, because there's always a 3 or 4% chance that I could be wrong about everything. You might have this day to convince me, right? So I wasn't even hostile toward them. I was like, can anyone explain to me what exactly this is supposed to mean? No one had the heart to explain it. It resulted in basically a sea of blocks and genuinely bad behavior, which they would consider bad behavior if they weren't doing it to me at that time.
If a bunch of trans women, acted this way to a Asian woman who was just asking questions about trans issues, oh, they'd be outraged. Oh,
They'd be outraged. How dare you? Isn't this racism? I mean, you've got to answer the questions and stop just doing block and cancel culture, right? That's what they'd be saying. But as soon as I'm like, guys, can you explain your side of this? Then it's suddenly like, oh, actually, we don't want to explain anything, and also you're a bad person, and we're going to do some racism while we're at it.
Yeah. The interesting thing about TERF ideology that I've actually found is that a lot of their spokesmen seem to be men. Gleiner?
Yeah.
What was that? Oh, that trans model. What was his name?
Buck
Angel. Yes, there we go. He's big. He's big with them as well. And people like that, those are the ones that really seem to get attention in these TERF areas. It's interesting how a lot of their things seem very passive. Like, oh, when will men save us from these horrible trans people? Men need to stand up. And then they'll retweet this guy and give him all sorts of accolades, the one you were just describing about how he's a man standing up. But
and then, of course, as soon as you question any of these men, they're ready to throw you through the airlock.
And I find it interesting that they compare trans rights to The Handmaid's Tale, when isn't women tearing each other down to defend men one of the main ways that dystopia functions?
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's riddled with irony. It's very, very riddled with ironies.
And it's just disappointing, just that when you could actually take a firm position, as I think Jeremy Corbyn actually did. I think he was, pro-trans rights. I don't remember him ever really succumbing to TERF rhetoric. Correct me if I'm wrong.
He did not. Yeah, he didn't do anything that would be described as TERF rhetoric at any point in time. In fact, now that you've mentioned that, because I had this talking point saved up as well, which I thought would come up. So the interesting thing about what many of these people who are now doing what they've been doing, the things we've been discussing earlier, is that Jeremy Corbyn was criticised during the time that he was the leader of the Labour Party because he wasn't talking about trans issues, quote unquote, enough. Which I found quite baffling, because I think I would consider it, in British politics, I would consider it probably a wise choice not to go reopening a box of things that had already been settled to relitigate them if they've already been settled. So it would
Yeah.
be the correct choice for him not to go back and start looking at stuff. But no, he was criticised for not speaking enough on it. And then as soon as he was gone, all of the people who criticised him for not speaking enough on it are suddenly like, yeah, you know what we need to do? We need to reopen the box and become tangled up in it. Why? And of course, they're not even getting tangled up in it in a way that involves like an attempt to detangle it. They're getting tangled
Yeah.
up in it because they don't know how to say no to J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, they've really become a party of celebrities, Oh, how can we be as friendly to like rich liberal celebrities as possible and gain their endorsements, because that's how we win.
Exactly. And of course, like, which part of J.K. Rowling is interested in winning elections? I mean, at this point, how much is she worth at this point? Does it matter to her whether the Tories are in power 1 year or Labour are in power the next? The fact that they're literally chasing her around trying to make sure they've perfectly aligned and calibrated themselves to J.K. Rowling's opinion on any given day is just like, well, you could be literally drunk tweeting out of her bedroom, and these guys are trying to make sure that they've got themselves perfectly aligned.
Yeah. And I just think it's sad, because if the Corbyn government had actually won the general election, I think the UK would have actually had one of the better pandemic responses in Europe, because a lot of the policies that Jeremy Corbyn was pioneering were really ideal for the pandemic, especially that free internet access for everyone. That would have been so helpful.
Yes, there's also the fact that the Conservative government that had been in power for 10 plus years had a pandemic response plan that they had not funded and had not followed the recommendations of Operation Signet, Exercise Signet, which was about finding out what the weak points were in a potential pandemic response in a coronavirus style event. Like, I mean, it was so specific that the rehearsal was for if it was a coronavirus, right? And so it's ironic. But basically, the whole thing was gamed through, and it was determined that there were a whole list of ways in which the UK was lacking, and then some recommendations were made as to what things needed to be implemented to make sure that there was resilience in the case that appropriate responses and appropriate supplies of personal protective equipment in the event that there was a transmissible airborne virus that could hop from person to person rapidly, right? That was the game, and the game revealed all of the weaknesses. So, ironically, there was one country that did learn from this, and it was Singapore, because Singapore is actually enacting the United Kingdom's plan that it would have had if the Conservatives had actually bothered to fund it.
How interesting.
Very ironic. And so, yes, and so I often like to make the joke, which is that Britain's pandemic response did work. It worked in Singapore. It just didn't happen here because no one funded it, because we're in austerity. We just don't have enough money, apparently. But Singapore has enough money. Singapore, literally a developing country which was previously colonized by the United Kingdom, has enough money to enact the plan that Britain should have enacted. But apparently Britain doesn't have the money to enact the plan that should have been enacted, because there needed to be more tax breaks for wealthy people who were looking and angling toward their 7th yacht.
Oh, but you're not considering the struggle of the business owner here, Ray. Think of them. Think of how much their profit margin might have hurt during the pandemic if they hadn't received all of that money.
Now, of course, either which way, this is one of those things where the system as it exists tends to cannibalize itself in a way that's deeply ironic, because these guys, their desire for short-term gains over long-term resilience and stability, it now means that they've still run into the into the ditch anyway, because eventually it comes a point where, you know, if the workers can't breathe oxygen because their lungs have been suffused with a virus that destroys them, then I'm not sure where they're planning to get these profits from, unless they're planning to just get more profits from seizing people's houses after they have died and flipping them.
But who's going to buy the flipped houses if they're all out of work?
And who's going to buy the flipped houses if they can't breathe oxygen? That's
Exactly.
the other one.
And
So-
if you have so many workers dead, no one will be consuming, or that huge
the
chunk of
entire
people
thing
that would have
grinds to
been
a halt.
buying goods is dead.
It's so simple, and yet they don't think it through. It reminds me of that Ben Shapiro joke that happened a long time ago. Do you remember the one where he was in a debate with someone, and someone asked Ben Shapiro what you would do if you had a house that was underwater due to global warming? And he said that, oh, you would just sell the house and flip it and move on. And it's like, okay, who are you going to sell it? Who are you selling it to? Ariel? Are they going to sing Under the Sea while they're moving the seahorses in or something? Like, how is that supposed to work?
The Manatee Brigade. Unfortunately, yeah. Well, conservatism, you know, it's an ideology of the past. It fundamentally is not built for these increasingly global, increasingly changing times, and it will always have these contradictions as long as it clings to outdated systems and morals. I don't know. I feel like we're going to be in a situation like the 1992 election where really John Major shouldn't have won. Like, the Conservatives had become deeply unpopular by that point. It was a pretty, you know, it could have easily gone Labour's way, but it didn't because of lacking leadership.
Yeah.
Weirdly enough, I think Neil Kinnock is probably a much better leader than Keir Starmer.
Indeed. So this is going to be like 1992, like worse, but worse,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that in 1992 you could understand that perhaps there was some confusion among the voters, and, you know, Neil Kinnock was being a bit weird and people didn't understand what was going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
This time around, it's almost like all of the lessons are behind us, so everyone can see these patterns, they understand them, and yet Keir Starmer has still chosen to repeat the same sequence of moves that didn't work last time. And he's done it not sleepwalking and not accidentally, but almost consciously, because he believes that's the correct thing to do. And then we have voters who've almost placed an ironic distance between themselves and their own vote. So they'll go into the booth and be like, okay, we know that Boris Johnson's an actual idiot, but because of like some discourse on Twitter, I'm now forced to vote for Boris Johnson, because otherwise I will be owned by, I don't know, someone who was dunking on me 3 weeks ago. Like, I don't know. Like, this is one of those things where there's almost like there's a meta politic overlaying the whole thing, where there's a level of irony between what people are doing and what they actually believe. And, you know, quite often when you drill down on some of these voters, you find out they don't believe anything. So, for example, there was a BBC interview recently where they were just interviewing people on the street about the COVID passport, for example. And
Yeah.
there were plenty of voters who were like, I think a COVID passport is a great idea because it's something that helps to keep us safe, but also at the same time they're opposed to it because it would compromise freedom. So it's kind of like, okay, which one is it? Is it something you want to do because it keeps you from actually being dead? Or is it something you're against because the freedom to be dead supersedes the taste of delicious oxygen? Like, I'm not sure like how to understand this, but in this interview, like almost 80% of respondents, when you go across and if you go through all of the different interviews BBC has had where they put like random clips of like guy on the street or girl on the street, etc., they're all
Yeah.
giving these weirdly contradictory responses where they will state up front the thing which is actually logical and sensible, and then they will afterwards like semi-correct themselves by going into a sort of ironic meta level and critiquing the response they've just given. So, and then with a sort of self-satisfied smug smile, almost as if to say, okay, well, yes, being alive is cool, but also on the other hand, I want to be in a particular tribe of people that talks about freedom a lot, and so I need to say this anyway.
Yeah. It's as if they sort of acknowledge the reality, and then they're like, ugh, but I have to identify with this group. I have to have the sort of opinions that people in this group have. So,
Exactly.
and then you get some sort of meaningless rhetoric.
Exactly.
It's a bit perverse. Um,
And I think that is something which is different from where it was in 1992. And of course, maybe someone can correct me if I'm wrong, because obviously people who are literally full adults in 1992 might probably watch this stream at some point and be like, no, it was like that then too. So I mean, obviously I take their criticism if that was the case, but I'm imagining that in 1992, if people were put questions on the street, they would have given what they thought their actual response was, and not what they think the people they hang out with would have wanted them to say in that case, in order to make sure that they can still be a member of that group.
well, I think the
And so
problem is also like social media. People want to say something that will make them look cool and make them look appealing to as many people as possible, and also make them look smart and urbane and, you know, irreverent.
actually, yes, the irreverence one as well is one that I found is quite interesting, and the way that it ties together into this weird. It's something that I've called the cannibalization of 1945, which is basically this weird kind of thing. Like, you know, how conservatives in the United States, for example, love to do this whole thing where they genuflect to the book written by
Oh, this
what's his name,
reminds me
that
of
book 1984.
1984.
Yeah, and they'll always say, this reminds me of 1984, and then they'll sort of build some kind of weird analysis on the basis of them imagining a thing that didn't happen.
Yeah.
The same thing that happens in the United Kingdom, except it's always like it's more subtle than that. It's like a subtle reference to a reality that didn't manifest, that could have manifested if Germany had won the Second World War and Adolf Hitler had become like the Hitler in The Man in the High Castle or something, right? Where he's just like this ever-present controlling being who is infighting with people to do control over human beings in an abstract sense, right? So you always get this kind of thing where, for example, BBC News will go to someone and interview them and like, what do you think of mask mandates or something like that? And they'll be like, oh, mask mandates sound like a great way to control the spread of the virus, to make sure that, more people are not infected and we don't have a higher number of excess deaths. But at the same time, I'm not very comfortable with a government that mandates things. And it's always said with this kind of ominous tone at the end of it, almost like, oh yes, we're definitely trying our hardest to not be Adolf Hitler. Or you'll have another one where it's like, oh, what do you think of COVID passports? Oh, well, I'm sound like a great idea to prevent spread of virus in clubs and pubs, but I'm not comfortable with a government or I'm not comfortable in a kind of social order in which people are asked to show their papers. Ominous music in the background or something, right? And so basically forever fleeing from Adolf Hitler, right? But perversely, when it comes time to have this conversation about something they're in favor of, so for example, let's say that they wanted to let me think of something. Let's say they
Voter
wanted to,
registration.
yeah, voter registration or mass migration or let me think. There's another one. Religious affiliation, because of course they're trying to sort out the crazy Islamic fundamentalists who may be behind any street sign, for example, just waiting to
Mhm.
pounce on you. Any number of things which are considered to be okay to be afraid of, right? They'll be like, okay, yeah, we need to clamp down. There needs to be a registration system. There needs to be a way of cataloging and keeping track of people via the use of numbers. They're totally ready to go all in on just becoming like IBM punch card man, right?
Yeah.
But as soon as it's something to do with public health, then suddenly it's like, well, I don't know if we can actually have documents to keep track of people. I mean, do I have a credit card? Is this the sign of the Antichrist? Like, what's going on here? Like, immediately we go into this very weird, like, we've suddenly become super libertarian on a level that's absolutely ridiculous, but just on this one particular issue.
Yeah. Well, do you think that there's an element of ideological poison that's drifted into the UK from the US around these sorts of topics?
Yes, probably, because I mean, social media and the fact that they both speak the same language, and the fact that, I mean, frankly, since Margaret Thatcher has been in power, there's been this strange deference toward, I guess, intellectual leadership from the American right filtering its way through the British Conservative Party. You've got a lot of trickle down, half baked versions of American ideas that will often migrate their way into the UK, and then of course you have that whole subordinated mindset thing where you've got British people being very, what's the word for it, self-deprecating in the way that they behave, and then of course you've got the boisterousness of how Americans describe their own revolution and so on. And so you've often got Americans essentially muscling their way in, kind of being like, you guys don't understand freedom correctly. Freedom is when you literally inhale toxic fumes into your lungs. Okay, you need to get on the same level. And so you'll often have this kind of like, it will take a while because it doesn't always happen immediately. Like it's not like you'll have something happen in America and then the United Kingdom instantly the same nonsense occurs. But it will usually take like a couple of years. Like for instance, at the beginning of the pandemic, you didn't have like a massive upheaval instantly of like anti-masker stuff like how it happened in the United States. The United Kingdom at first had like a sort of a mild skepticism among certain portions of the population, or you'd have people who were skeptical but wouldn't tell you they were skeptical. They just do things that are actually dangerous, and then you'd have to shut them down, right? And then eventually it developed into this loudness that you're getting now, which is basically people loudly disclaiming the need for the use of masks, people loudly disclaiming the use for loudly talking against the need for vaccinations of people who clearly do need to be vaccinated. But also quite critically, we had a government that was secretly, and I strongly believe this based on their behavior, that was secretly not too interested in fighting the virus appropriately from the very start. Because this was a government that actually tried to pursue the herd immunity path quite early in the game. And, people were sacrificed as a result of that.
This is my conspiracy theory. You're stealing it.
I mean, yeah, you can say it's a conspiracy theory, and I get what you mean by that. You mean a conspiracy theory that actually happened? Because I mean, this is one of those things where you can't even call it conspiracy because it was done almost.
It was government policy. They told you about it.
Government policy. They literally told people they were attempting to do
It
it,
was
and then
mine.
it didn't work out the way they thought it would.
It was
The other thing that I thought was quite interesting in terms of rhetoric, right, is something that I haven't had a chance to talk about on any live stream yet, but it's one where perhaps there needs to be a whole live stream on this particular issue one day, which is the country of Sweden and what it represents as a sort of symbol in political language, because Sweden means a lot of things to a lot of different people. Like for example, if you ask like people who are Bernie Sanders supporters in the United States, for example, what does Sweden mean to you? They'll give you some strange responses.
Oh, socialist utopia.
They might tell you it's a socialist utopia, even though, well, technically it isn't. Or they'll tell you it's a place where people are very tolerant, or it's a place where human rights and women's rights are respected. I mean,
look at the Swedish Democrats rising in the polls.
But yeah, if you just ignore the Swedish Democrats, you can totally make yourself a case for that. And then, of course, if you ask like, the far right, for example, what do you think Sweden is? Or at least if you ask the far right what they thought Sweden was prior to the year 2020, they'll tell you,
the rape capital of
Sweden,
Europe because of Muslims.
Yep, the sexual assault capital of Europe because of the Muslims who are being allowed in, because the migrant flows which have been disturbed from the wars in Iraq and Syria, which we supported, but we're now pretending we never supported, actually are causing all of these migrants to just flow into the country, and they're just going around sexually assaulting people. And additionally, on top of that, they'll be telling you that Sweden is like cuck nation or something, because no one in Sweden ever pushes back on anything. They just allow foreign things to enter the country and do whatever they want.
Oh no!
But if you fast forward past the year 2020, so that you're deep into the pandemic, about 4 or 5 months into the pandemic, so you're on around like say June and July of 2020, you'll suddenly discover that actually right-wingers in the United States love and respect Sweden, because Sweden is willing to accept foreign things floating around in the country, such as COVID-19. So Sweden, lover of COVID-19, has decided to pursue herd immunity by deliberately trying to infect every single Swede with COVID-19. That was the actual government policy of Sweden, to get everyone possible infected as quickly as possible. They actually did that. Everyone got infected. People got sick. It was bad. People have long COVID. It's still bad. And additionally, on top of that, it did not actually confer immunity, because now they're all getting COVID-19 a second time.
Because, well, not only does the immunity wear off, there's variants that emerge.
Exactly, variants emerge because of the fact that it's being passed around, and it has more opportunities to mutate. But the more human beings it is induced to pass through. And so, I found it very weird that conservatives who have spent the past 10 years or more, saying that basically don't copy anything that Sweden does, because Sweden is cuck nation and they will always be felled and flattened by anything they come across, because they're just unable to formulate public policy that isn't dumb. Okay, interesting. As soon as we come to 2020, Sweden's like, COVID-19 at the doors. Let's just let it in like we let in migrants, for example. Okay, interesting. Suddenly conservatives decide, Sweden is definitely a place that we should be taking cues from on how to do public policy. They're absolutely right on this, of course. I just find that mind-blowing.
When did the swatch
I
happen?
don't think any conservatives on social media have been called to account on that yet, because the conservatives themselves are the ones who spent the past 10 years building up the idea that don't do anything that Sweden does because Sweden is black.
What did you say, Heartless?
I said, when did everything change? Why? Okay, it wasn't that long ago that I thought right wingers would be like, listen to the doctors, take your meds, take your vaccines. You know, they'd be like, fuck you if
Indeed.
you can't go to school. Well, too bad. It was like, you take your shit, right?
That was another one. You've raised that good one as well, the one with the schools thing. I actually had a conversation on Twitter with some conservative who was going down that line before, and they essentially evaded their way out of it. But I asked them, okay, you guys think that schools are bad and that people should be homeschooling in the first place because you don't think the values being taught in American public schools are great. So then why are they in the thread here arguing with me that every single child on planet Earth desperately needs to go to school so they can learn critical race theory that they disagree with? No one could furnish me with a response. Not a single person could give me a response to that question as to why conservatives have suddenly decided that the schools that are supposedly infected with left-wing ideologies that are going to destroy America need
Yeah,
to
I thought
suddenly
these were
have
the
every
arms
single
of
child in them.
communism.
Exactly. So suddenly everyone needs to go to school and get their dose of communism now because otherwise big vaccination might win. I don't know. Like what do I can't even understand
I
it.
just don't know what their problem is. Like, you think it would be my type of people that would be like, don't trust the vaccine. You never know what the government's going to give you. And that's
Indeed, it's
partially
there.
true because, like, with the indigenous in Canada here, like, not even 10 years ago at all, like, maybe 5 years ago, they were being, like, forced sterilized, like, injected, and they were getting sterilized and shit. So, in, like, some cases, yeah, like,
Yeah, there are some
you got to
populations that would
argue
be
that
distrustful
people have a
of
right to.
Yeah, for people of color and indigenous
But the
people.
white far right, like, I'm not understanding. They were always the ones that were like medicine, big pharma, win, capitalism, let's go.
And also, hypothetically, if there were some kind of weird conspiracy to basically do something horrendous with vaccines, the people who would be the last people on the list to fall victim to such a thing would be the people who are doing the complaining right now. Like, I mean, it's kind of like, Todd, the blonde-hair, blue-eyed dude bro, is literally not going to be on the list of the first person to get racistly racisted. It's not going to happen.
No, because
But you see,
he'd be the first leader to listen. He'd be the first guy to be like, yes, sir, I'll listen to my government, but it's like
Also on top of
opposite
that,
land.
in this supposed conspiracy the right wingers keep coming up with, like, how do they explain the fact that the people who they claim are the architects of this conspiracy have also injected themselves with the exact same thing they claim is part of the conspiracy? Like, how is Bill Gates going to magically destroy the entire planet while also injecting himself with the same vaccine that he's not responsible for because
it's a fake water vaccine. He just injected water into himself.
I mean,
No.
this is where they're at now, and it's like, what is actually going on?
Well,
Okay, but
the
why
thing
fuck medicine? But also, you can, like, eat poisonous plants or horse dewormer, and that'll work. What's
That's
that
the other
about?
one that's quite interesting. This weird thing with
ivermectin.
the ivermectin thing and so on, that's absolutely ridiculous. I never dreamed I'd see anything like that, because I've been trying to make predictions throughout the entire pandemic of how society will one up itself in ridiculousness next. But I never imagined that there'd be people taking what is objectively horse medicine marketed to horses for horses, and then claiming that untested horse medicine in humans is somehow magically safer than a vaccine that has been administered to billions of people already. Now, that one took my breath away, and I'm saying that as a pun, of course. Now, having almost had my breath taken away by that one, I could not have prepared myself for what would come next. The conspiracy that conservatives have created, claiming that, quote, big pharma is trying to, quote unquote, get them to take the quote unquote vaccine, which is part of the big quote unquote conspiracy they believe is occurring, right? So we pause for approximately 5 seconds to think about this. So they believe that Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and AstraZeneca are somehow in on some kind of like weird compact to make you buy their product using government taxpayer money, but that magically the only way to fight against this is to go to another pharma company named Merck to take horse medicine.
Uh,
Like, how is Merck going to save them from Pfizer? This structurally makes no sense. This is like the equivalent of being like Coca-Cola is waging a conspiracy to make you drink their product, and so the only one who can save you now is Pepsi? I mean, this is bizarre, right?
I don't know.
Well, no, I mean, seriously. This ivermectin stuff is manufactured mostly by Merck, is it not?
Yes, and then they're also criticizing the new pill that Merck released because they think that's just ivermectin in a fancy new thing, even though the two chemicals have absolutely nothing to do with one another.
Oh,
Oh,
my
God.
gosh.
So
So-
we must buy the cure that Big Pharma is making, but not the other cure that Big Pharma is making, because that one's bad. And also not the vaccine that's also made by Big Pharma, because that one's bad. That this specific product for a different species is good.
Uh-huh. Also, I recall since we're talking about Merck and the products they make for another species, I recall previously that the same individuals who are presently telling you that you need to eat Merck's product for another species were also the people who, and I'm going to get this date exactly right, who 7.5 years ago told us that getting the HPV vaccine, which was made by Merck, would make your feet fail and spin around on themselves so that you could only walk backwards. Yeah, it was those individuals. That was those individuals who said that. There was a whole conspiracy surrounding how Merck is trying to make you walk backwards. And these same individuals who hawked that ridiculous conspiracy 7.5 years ago, and now the people telling you you should eat their horse paste.
I should take this, get my backward skating down pat.
So incredible. And so
Sometimes
it's almost like
I
feel like conservatives don't actually think these things through, or at least they think we have really short memories. They think no, they'll not remember the 7.5 years ago we told them to do the opposite of the thing we're presently claiming, right?
It could be, though, that the reality is oppositional. You know, it's not based around a consistent set of beliefs, but rather on opposing what they interpret to be mainstream beliefs. Essentially, it's right-wing counterculture.
Yes, actually, yeah. I mean, that's probably the only way that any of this makes sense. It's like perpetually opposite day for them.
Yeah. Oh, well, you support a mask so we don't catch COVID and die? Oh, well, no. Now I'm suddenly about bodily autonomy. Don't make me wear a mask. Don't make me wear any clothing. Wait, you're wearing a burqa. Take that off. Take that off right now. You're not allowed to wear that piece of cloth unless I say so.
Exactly.
And then, these people at the border, they have to undergo so many checks, so many invasive searches at the airport. That's fine, especially if it's happening to Muslim men. What, you
If they
want me
have
to show a
COVID-19, wave them
vaccine
right through.
passport that will take half a second on your phone?
I mean, speaking of which, that was something that was not addressed at conference, but should have been addressed, which is that Boris Johnson and his cronies, and Priti Patel in particular, have been spending the past couple of years signaling against people who show up at the border and ask to be admitted into the borders because they want to claim asylum or because they've been harmed in some way in their home country and they would like to claim asylum. And so, barriers are up, and it's like, well, you've got to jump through the appropriate number of hoops, and you need to do this without our assistance, and you need to do it over a flaming pit of fire, which is in turn suspended over a warp hole that will take you to the middle of the sun, right? So you've got all of that happening, and then you've also got Boris Johnson at the same time explaining that there's no longer any red list, meaning that if a person is trying to enter the country and believes, and there's a reasonable belief that this person may be carrying a deadly virus such as COVID-19 Delta variants, they're no longer going to be subject to quarantine. They can just come right in and cough on you, right? So this is the mystery here, okay? This is the mystery. So we're all deathly afraid of Afghan migrants who are coming to the country because the war in Afghanistan was done incorrectly and everything imploded on itself, etc. We know that story. So we're deathly afraid of them, but we're not afraid of them because that entire country may be a vector for COVID-19. No. We're afraid of them apparently because they are brown. But if they stopped being brown and just had COVID, we'd let them in. I mean, this is completely ridiculous, and the only way to explain that is opposite day. It has to be opposite day.
And also, oh please, American right, accept us. You know?
Exactly. We're putting on our best behavior. We're ginning up the best prejudices. We're so configuring ourselves to make ourselves look cool to you. Can you just pat us on the head and tell us we're cool?
But I don't know if they realize that America will always see itself as superior to the UK because they broke away.
Pretty much. I mean, it was the whole point in 1776. So I mean, no amount of kissing up is going to allow is going to actually have them be recognized. And even then, being recognized can have its own, what's the word for it? Can have its own accidental downsides. Because even if they were recognized, it would be an embrace that they would soon come to regret.
Yes, the kiss of death.
Pretty much. I mean,
So-
technically speaking, I mean, even the attempt to arrive at a position where they could get subjected to the kiss of death has already resulted in large numbers of people dying for no apparent reason. So, who knows what the actual kiss of death might deliver?
Exactly. Hopefully you don't find out under... Do you think... Because Biden presidency, I have my doubts. I think Biden will not run for re-election, but hopefully he's not unpopular enough that he'll destroy completely any hope.
You mean Biden being unpopular enough?
Yeah, I don't want him to be unpopular enough that he destroys any hope that his challenger will win.
Oh, because then people won't actually, put in the effort to put in, you'll end up with a challenger that wins.
Yeah.
Can't we do another one?
Yes. We've seen this happen with the Hillary Trump scenario where everyone was like, there's no way that Hillary could possibly lose to this absolute, ridiculous orangutan. And then, of course, what exactly happens other than that?
Exactly.
So, yeah, I mean, I can imagine that happening, but, it's one of those things where, I mean, if it does happen, I mean, who would that even be? Because I don't think it could be Donald Trump the second time, right?
No, he can run a second time.
I mean, he can do it, but would he do it?
Maybe.
It depends on how old and weak he is by that point.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm imagining that the aging process must have to kick in at some point. I mean, he's a guy who's been surviving off McDonald's for many years. I don't understand how
not
he's still able to...
You want to talk about poison being put into the body? Let's talk about Donald Trump's diet.
I mean, literal goop on a day-to-day basis.
Come on. That stuff preserves you. That keeps you alive longer. Think about it.
And then, of course, you've got his consumption of Diet Coke on a ritualistic basis as well, which is also crazy.
Exactly.
He's Diet Coke one of the most unhealthy things you can drink?
Yes.
Yeah.
And yet he drinks that constantly. That's the only soft drink supposedly that he drinks, and yet he's still walking around. He's still doing fine. So not sure what's up with that, but it will have to catch up with him eventually.
It's preserving him like a mummy. Okay, it's a slow process.
Yeah, all of that excess salt consumption will eventually desiccate his corpse. Will be preserved forever.
You won't even have to prep him when he dies. You can just put him in a box.
You can make the other argument,
but
though, which is that basically, we're at a point where carcinogens possibly can't actually give Donald Trump cancer because the number of cells dying in his body on a day-to-day basis are so rapid that they can never actually become cancer because they're already dead before it could ever happen, right? So,
stop.
The metastasization process just becomes impossible.
Oh my god.
So you're just looking for a way to grow, and it's well, there are so many dead cells here. I mean, we just can't do it. I mean, cell death is happening everywhere.
And they just
jump ship. Concerning Canada, concerning the UK, and concerning the States, don't you think we're all could we agree we're all a little tired of this whole voting system thing, whatever you want to call it.
Absolutely.
Isn't it just
Yeah,
like
I mean, in its
bullshit?
present
Doesn't it
form,
feel
it doesn't
like
seem to be.
you vote left, it goes right anyways? Like, it's wild. Like, even the liberals are kind of like assholes over here, and there are left. So I'm just wondering, what if we took a little lesson from France and just, did a little white vote and maybe threw shit on some government buildings? That's kind of a
What
bonus for me.
as in you mean actual civil disobedience? Like basically everyone just refuses to go to work and has wildcat strikes, and then the entire
Yes,
economy
can't
grinds to a
we
halt.
just take a little lesson from them and like we don't have to dial the notch all the way up to 11, okay? We don't have to go all that way. But couldn't we just do some kind of white vote, like where we're just all just like, nope, we don't want any of these parties or whatever. We want something better. Like, we're sick of this shit. Can't we do that?
That
I mean,
sounds like the Yippie Party in the late 1960s.
How did that go? It sounds bad. Sounds in the
Well,
past.
it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it was a rather successful protest counterculture movement. I think there was this riot outside of the Democratic National Convention. Hoffman wrote "Steal This Book," and that was basically a guide to like anti-work anarchist praxis.
Oh, that's good.
And yeah, so the Yippies were basically like a youth protest movement that satirized capitalist culture, did a bunch of like free stores, mutual aid. You can look it up if you like.
I love them. I will have to. But they sound like my kind of guys.
Yeah, Abby Hoffman and all his ilk. I think there was also a sellout in there as well, but that's inevitable.
It
yeah.
happens.
Even one of
Although
the Black
speaking,
Panthers sold out and started making his own like penis enhancing pants, I think, after living in Algeria.
Well, it's like I told Ray before. Even if you're a utopianist or whatever, it's more like you're trying to eliminate the bad things as much as possible. Not that they'll never ever pop up, because
also
you know.
speaking of sellouts, you know, all these kind of social movements that seek change and so on. I mean, I agree with Heartless that there's always going to be someone who's going to be a sellout. You may even have people who are literally working with the authorities to try to undermine what you're doing and so on. And I saw a statement from someone. It was someone who had been through that whole process in the 1960s that was talking about the issue. Probably about a year ago or something, people were talking about this, and they said, they found from their experience that one of the best ways to prevent an organization from being co-opted or subverted or taken over by someone who is literally directly working for the right and was seeking to crash it into the ground, one of the best ways to prevent these people from being able to get a foothold or being able to enter and reach a level of influence where they could crash and burn an organization from the inside on purpose is prevent people from doing homophobia and misogyny. Because the pattern they noticed in the 1960s and the 1970s was that, and this is like near 100%, like it was like 90 something, 99 point something percent of people who attempted to do these things used homophobia or misogyny as the levers through which they would control people or exert their influence to get themselves into a position to subvert the organization. So basically, if you prevent that as being an avenue of entry from the start, as being an informal axis of power that exists outside of the regular power structures, because that's how they would usually operate. They would have like them and a bunch, and like let's say a few misogynist men, and perhaps like some women who were in some way being bullied by them. They would usually end up being the ones who pushed forward, motions and ideas that would lead to complete destruction of the entire of the entire thing if you allowed them to reach maturation. And their conclusion was basically, if you stop homophobia and you stop misogyny from the outset, you have locked down one of the most major avenues of entering that three-letter organizations have for subverting your organization.
Turns out
upheld.
bigots are the real wreckers.
Yeah, basically. I mean, and it's not just unconscious ones, i.e., people who do this because they don't realize what they're doing, but the actual ones who are planning to wreck on purpose will always use these levers if you allow them to first, because it's the easiest ones for them to use. And if you look at like declassified stuff, for example, Federal Bureau of Investigations and people like that, the FBI and so on, or the police, for example, they lean to those levers first. If they want to take down your organization, they'll try doing that first because that's easy. They know how to do that, so they're always going to try to do that first. And then if you resolutely prevent that sort of behavior from being tolerated, i.e., both in sincerity and in not sincerity, you've essentially accidentally stopped the wreckers at the same time because you've denied them their most favorite avenue for subverting your structure. I would even suspect, and this is something that obviously we don't have data to back this up yet, but I mean, I would even suspect that we will later discover that transphobia is an avenue for wreckers as well. But obviously, it's early days. We don't have enough data to be able to definitively like point this out yet, but I would not be surprised if we learn perhaps 10 or 15 years from now that some of the people who deliberately injected transphobia into the discussion spaces that caused like parties and social organizations to turn in on themselves and fight, we may later discover that these people did this on purpose in order to destroy those organizations.
Of course they did.
Yeah, absolutely. I do believe that they are working with right-wing astroturfs in America, and that's where the money is coming from. That's already clear. You can trace the funding to LGB Alliance.
Yeah.
I think I saw Trump at one of those fucking meetings.
And it's funny how much LGB Alliance has already capitulated. They seem to have turned against bisexuality and also against gay marriage.
They
Honestly,
think
maybe
they're
it has
on a
happened in
fast
front of us
track.
already. Because I was about to just say that brings you close to government, but doesn't bring you literally to three-letter agencies or literally to the cabinet of an existing government, for example. But I take that back. I take that back in two ways. The first way in which I take it back is that Family Research Council already took money from Vladimir Putin's Russia already, so that's one government. Okay, and we have a second government now as well, which is that you just mentioned LGB Alliance, which reminded me that 3 days ago, LGB Alliance set up a stall in the, what do we call it? That conservative conference thing, and then announced that they were going to be present in the conservative conference because the Conservative Party cabinet have invited them. So, I mean, I guess there is your government connection. I mean, the literal actual government of the United Kingdom has said that LGB Alliance is chill and that they can hang out with them. So, there's your connection.
And as you see more and more, the policies that are going to start to try to implement will move the UK step by step by step backwards on gay rights.
I will say, though, if they're trying to move too fast by trying to split up buys already and everything, that's a bad move on their part.
Yeah, because I think it's one of those things where if this is an operation which they are running, which is basically a state-backed operation, then they're doing it in such a way that they're going to be found out. Like they're already being found out, but I mean they're doing it in such a transparent way. It kind of looks sus from the start. Like even if you're looking at this from like a purely unbiased perspective, like even if you weren't familiar with LGBT issues, for example, or any of the developments that have gone on over the past 20 years or whatever, even if you looked at it now and saw like there's a group called LGB Alliance and they don't use the rainbow symbolism and they constantly talk about two things only, it would seem kind of sus from the start. And so I kind of feel like they're going to continue to go down that path, and eventually this whole thing is going to run into a ditch because
if they go
it's
too
starting
fast,
to look too obvious.
if they go too fast, they're going to fumble. So I think the only thing you can really do in retaliation to that is keep strong by pushing, facts and keeping
And
people's
basically
beliefs
don't lose your
out
cool.
there.
And we also have to keep constantly exposing them for their homophobic, lesbophobic, and anti-bi bigotry.
Yeah, I shared a link with Ray in the Discord a while back concerning that study that actually also shows that if anyone does get assaulted in any way, it's trans people for doing the bathrooms.
Okay.
Especially when they're forced into the bathrooms with cis men.
Yeah, it's an article but it links to the full study and everything, and you could look over that yourself. But it's
Okay.
there.
I'll definitely check it out.
Like, that's just one way to be like, well, apparently cis women are more dangerous in the bathroom than I am. Like, what the fuck do you want? Get out
Also,
of
at
my
the same
bathroom.
time,
I can't trust you, bitch. Get out of the bathroom. No cis women in the women's bathroom. They need their own space. They're dangerous.
also at the same time that all of this was developing, by the way, I don't know if you guys have kept track of the Sarah Everard case, which was the one where the police essentially did the murder and then everyone had to unfortunately find out about it afterwards. I mean, we're now at a point where the people who should have been talking about this issue had spent the entire time previously looking as far away from it as possible, because obviously they were literally going around in circles on trying to find ways to blame trans women for various things or whatever, totally ignoring the fact that, of course, there are men in police uniforms walking around actually doing crimes. I mean, this is some ridiculousness. And so we've got the Metropolitan Police who came out yesterday, day before yesterday, and said that if you're approached by a lone male officer and you feel unsafe, you should flag down the nearest bus, escape from the location, and then call the police. The same police. So
that you
it's
were
quite
running away
interesting.
from.
The police which we are indeed running away from. So let's break down how that's ridiculous, okay? This is Tories, like, from top to bottom. So conservative nonsense. So first off, if there's a policeman running toward you trying to arrest you, what are the chances that the policeman will catch you before you can flag down a bus in the United Kingdom? Well, first off, a bus would have to be coming first, so that's one thing. We have, investment in public infrastructure. I mean, we'd have to have that first. Then
Does anyone fucking pull over
Yeah, I'm about to get to that as
for
well.
you
In the United
over
Kingdom, since
there?
1997, buses have not pulled over for you if you try to flag them down and you're not standing next to a bus stop. They will accelerate to get away
I
from
did
you
not
just to show
think
you how
so.
wrong you are. So,
I did not think so.
Why
and
did
so
they
yeah.
do that?
Oh, because the principle is supposed to be that you're only supposed to flag down a bus from standing at a bus stop, and they will viciously not stop for you if you try to flag them down from a place other than
Yeah, like
a
they
bus
get
stop.
pissed
And so,
off.
That's really weird.
and so the
It's
so the
kind of like that in
bias.
Canada too.
And bear in mind, the government which is telling people that you just flag down a bus randomly and jump on it, they're the very people who presided over the existence of that practice. So it's almost like a level of disconnect if they think that anyone can flag down a bus in this country and have it actually stop for them, not as an appointed bus stop at the appointed time when it's supposed to stop, and never before and never after. The thing about buses in the UK
What a
is that
vehicle though to put in that situation.
buses will not even arrive early. Buses will not arrive early if it's possible for them to arrive early. What they will do instead is, if they arrive at a bus stop and they're ahead of schedule, they will wait at that bus stop until the time is the correct time to depart from that bus stop. That's how rigorous it actually is. You will never be able to convince a bus to stop to allow you to jump onto it if you are running away from a policeman. That's not going to happen, right? First, the second thing is, I know where you're going to go with this, Heartless, but I'm getting ahead of you on this. The next thing that's ridiculous about this is that, why is it our responsibility to run away from sexual assaulty policemen or murdery policemen to try to find a bus that won't stop for us, rather than it being the policeman's or the police responsibility to make sure they vet their candidates so that they're not hiring actual criminals and putting them into uniforms? That's a question which needs to be asked. Like, why is it our responsibility to avoid murder on the street?
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yes, go on.
Why the fucking bus in the first place? Like, you just, like, okay, you got a potential assaulter coming after you, chasing
why a bus,
you down,
right?
and you want to put a bunch of, like, civilians traveling on the bus at risk?
That's the other thing that makes no sense. Yes, very true. Like, why a bus specifically? Like, why not duck into a store? Why not anything else?
Like, why not make it a school bus? Let's make it a school bus.
Why not flag
Flag
down a school
down, you
bus?
need a school bus.
I mean,
And
that would
the
stop.
other
I mean,
thing
that
is,
wouldn't stop either, but still, the principle.
this is something that's completely inaccessible and would never, ever work, even at the best circumstances. But this is actually lethal advice in the case of Afro Brits.
Oh yeah. I mean, so other people were also saying that, yeah. I mean, if you're an ethnic minority, it's a very fast way to end up dead. Also, if you want, if you're trying to escape from the police when the police are trying to chase you and you don't trust them, so that's also a tough one. Then you've got, in addition to all of that, in addition to the ridiculousness of being told to trace and flag down a bus that will definitely never stop for you, that allows us to segue to the other story from earlier that week, 7 days previously, in which the Tories were asked, what is their plan for public infrastructure, given that it's not looking like it's in a good condition in many parts of the country right now? And their beautiful idea was as follows. We're going to make green bus stops that are so green you won't believe them. In fact, they're going to attempt to propose an idea to build, brace yourself for this, public showers at the bus stop, so that if you are jogging toward the bus stop, hypothetically in a world in which rich people ever understood how exactly one goes about catching a bus, you could hypothetically take a shower at the bus stop and then get onto the bus. So, of course, everyone looked at this incredulously and was like, well, have you ever seen what a bus stop looks like? Because I'm pretty sure if you didn't have enough infrastructure to build the basics of a bus stop, I'm pretty sure you're not going to have enough space to build in an entire sort of bathroom and shower complex adjacent to the bus stop. And the lore of urban planning suggests to us that even if you did build such a bus stop and it did have such a bus stop shower complex, you would have, first off, the problem of sexual assault in the location. Second off, the problem of garbage piling up inside of the building, because that's where people are going to put garbage, is going to happen. You're not going to be able to avoid that. And thirdly, the homeless population which you refuse to rehouse is going to try to take up residency inside of that location, so you'll never be able to access it anyway because they'll be in it. Thirdly, your response to them being in it is going to be to put gigantic padlocks that can only come off when you put coins in, which means you've essentially monetized the location, which is going to lead to some weird stuff. Then you've created a greater probability for abuse because now you've got lockable doors that can only be opened by money that people can push other people into.
He's dead. He's already dead.
Then no, we're not even done yet. Then, what was the other thing? Oh yes, and then we can also have the Labour Party import their trans rights self-recrimination process into the context of what about the bathroom that's like by the bus stop?
Oh yeah, you can't go into the trans bus stop.
Trans bus stop.
No. Not
So,
trans
yeah.
bus stop bathroom discourse.
Yeah, that. So basically everything, and so everyone was just looking at the Conservatives at this point and thinking, so how did you guys get from we asked you about green infrastructure to whatever the heck this discourse is, right? Unbelievable.
I bet all trans people just would never use that shower.
Never, ever, absolutely not.
Why would you use a shower in public under any circumstances? Like
who enjoys?
We call it
what public transport is.
There's only two people who would like this facility: rapists and exhibitionists.
Pretty much.
Or like a homeless person who needs a shower.
Well,
I can
no,
see
because
that.
it's going to have monetized locks.
It's going to have monetized locks, obviously, to prevent them from getting
Well,
in.
if he gets some change and he gets in.
Yeah, but then will he ever leave?
Yeah.
Well, he needs to wash, if you know, or she.
No, but I'm just pointing out this is an obvious pitfall in the grand conservative plan for.
I'm trying as hard as I can with these fucking bus stop bathrooms. Like I can't.
And there were so many people giving like joke responses, like, yes, the thing that I definitely enjoy doing is spending like 2 hours doing makeup so that I can wash it all off in a public bathroom as a bus stop.
Let's put spikes in the bathroom.
It just sounds like such a waste of money. Like, why not instead just fix the roads, buy and hire more bus drivers and more buses?
So you're saying that's the bus stop bathroom?
You mean doing a thing that Jeremy Corbyn suggested, which is spending money on public infrastructure? That would be socialism, unfortunately. More buses and actual transport, that would be socialism. But
no, we want green buses.
Discourse at the bus stop. Now that is the truly conservative solution to a problem you didn't even know you had.
What makes it green is that after you have a shower, it trickles down in the cement and like grass starts growing through the cracks.
And actually, when you think about that as well, that's going to be a whole new level of what's the word for it? Line failure, because of the fact that, of course, someone's going to eventually, pranksters are going to find a way to destroy the surface of the floor of the showers in some way. You're going to have like gigantic fountains of just water spouting
They
from
can't
the air
do
or
that.
something.
That's where I keep all my John Wick coins.
John Wick.
Don't cement bash open the bus stop bathroom floor.
It's gonna
If
it's
you
gonna be
hear that.
absolutely ridiculous. And then of course when challenged on this, what was the conservative pushback? The conservative pushback or explanation was, well, wouldn't it be just like airports? And of course, obviously, everyone's suggestion here is like, well,
What
I wasn't aware
bathrooms
of
in
there
there?
being showers at airports though, because I'm pretty sure
I've
that's
never
not a
taken
thing.
a shower at an airport.
Who
What?
has
I've
done
never
that?
seen one.
The
And
thing
I've
is,
It
been
doesn't
in,
exist.
so
I've
much
been
of
in Cuba, and they
See,
had a
no,
smoking room.
this is how we know, by the way, this is how we know these guys don't take public transport and they use private jets, because
Mhm.
all of their responses seem to indicate that they have never been to any of these places that they're talking about. They've never been to a bus stop. They've never been to a real airport, not on a private jet. Like,
I could see like a shower on a private jet.
The thing is, a lot of the problems with these sorts of people could easily be solved if no people who got a private school education were allowed to go to hold
Yes.
public office.
exactly. Problem solved instantly.
But what about me? Shit.
Well, okay. Let's make some corollaries to that. Private school education and an income over a certain amount.
Yes.
There you go. That way, we've allowed you to take public office now.
The heartless
Heartless can
exemption.
get to take public office after.
I went to private school for 2 years.
Why?
I don't know. It was a fancy change, I guess. Because I went to a regular place, and it was public, and it was all right. And then I think my parents split up, so we moved. So, like, I got to go to this fancy school, right?
Mhm.
But it was only for 2 years. I got a uniform and everything, and then we went canoeing, and we did all. Oh my God, it was like I experienced what it was like being a rich kid for 2 years in school. It's pretty like boss. Like you drive golf carts. I don't know what else.
Yeah, that does sound quite bougie. The closest thing to a private school I've ever been was my parents did preschool for me when I was like 3 and 2. I don't even know
Yeah.
if that qualifies. It's more just like, let's
I'm not
just
sure
get
that
rid of the child
qualifies.
early.
We couldn't afford it, so I went back to public school.
No, but watch now. You're gonna have like literally 2 years from now, right wingers are gonna surface this audio, and they're gonna say, Heartless, you are a hypocrite. For you went to private school for 2 years and then you couldn't afford to
Yeah,
pay for
my
it, so
poor
then you had to
parents
leave.
scrounged
This makes
up
you
enough money.
magically rich now.
No,
My poor parents scrounged up like life savings to help me go to a fancy school because they felt guilty about breaking up, and I didn't even give a shit.
this is generational wealth, Heartless.
I wish I got some of it.
Generational wealth. Did you see that
It
take
was
on
all spent
generational
in
wealth?
my youth, and now
I haven't
an
seen
adult.
this one. I must have missed
Get
this
your own
discourse.
wealth. Get your own wealth.
The whole thing on generational wealth on Twitter is that someone said that if your parents can help you pay money, help you slightly with your rent, give you any money for food, that you
I
have
pay my
generational wealth.
I pay my
Wouldn't
mother.
that be like? I mean, wouldn't that be literally everyone? Given that one would expect that your parents will probably be more wealthy than you, given that they've been alive
My
for longer.
mother
Like
is
you
the
would
landlord. I have to burn. All right. You know how awkward it is being in this
LOL.
situation.
That one's
Well-
gonna be quoted years from now as well. We're gonna come back. We've surfaced the audio. We discovered that Heartless's mom once owned a piece of land. She owned a piece of land.
Patriarchal.
It's true. My mom does own a piece of land in mortgage.
Oh, dun dun dun. Yeah, but as you were asking, Ray, that is literally everyone except white American parents who don't care about their kids.
Ah, I see. How ironic. And so basically, what sounds like it would have been amazing and awesome discourse is once again excused the usual suspects.
It sounds like Magic Tale.
Yeah, I
Man.
just adore the different insane discourses that pop up on Twitter. Like, there was this one time I encountered a person who thought that nurses were petty bourgeois.
What? How?
I think
Excuse
it
me.
They're just raking in money hand over fist as they
I
make sure you
know!
don't die.
And this
I
where I
mean-
think there's a sort of an intersection between like weird leftists and weird right wingers, as they both think nurses are in some sort of social position of advantage over them.
Like
Unbelievable.
how do you put this? I wouldn't say they're like the petite bourgeois or whatever, like, you know, being the upper rich class or what. But I do have some, you know, comments about nurses and doctors and abuse.
Oh, sure. Criticize the medical profession. Criticize
Yeah.
ableism within our system.
Hell yeah.
Don't pretend that they're like rich oppressors.
Exactly, they're definitely not the rich oppressors. I mean, I saw a joke the other day that's attached to the Kier Starmer thing about the McDonald's thing, where someone responded. I think it was someone from the NHS responded to the Starmer walk back, where he was like, "Oh, £15 an hour, but for that specific McDonald's in that specific part of the country," and then someone responded, "So when are we going to get like an NHS subcontracted sub-franchise of McDonald's? Because it sounds like the people that Keir Starmer wants to give £15 to are making more than people in the NHS right now."
Man.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, if you want to make money in the NHS, just become part of McDonald's, I guess. Just that specific McDonald's.
Yeah. That one
So what-
specific McDonald's will grow to incorporate like 1,000 people. It will just be the largest McDonald's in the world.
It would have to be.
It'll become its own state.
Everyone wants to join that McDonald's, just the whole state.
Mutual aid out of the McDonald's.
A McDonald's county.
Ronald McDonald,
yeah.
the eternal president. You can
I would fucking delete Ronald if he started a communist state. Are you kidding?
You could set it up with like North Korea coding or something. You just imagine like the news reporter being like, "Ronald McDonald, the eternal president, has said to us today that £15 an hour will continue to be the minimum wage, the living wage, which has always been from the time."
Oh my god. And the only food that anyone could purchase in the state of McDonald's would of course be McDonald's.
That's all they could make there.
The only thing that we can eat, and we are glad for it, is the
Workers
same McDonald's
eat
menu
free.
as it existed in the year 2021. It has not been updated. The year is now the 2040s. We're still having what are those things called again?
Workers eat for free if they work 8 hours straight. They get a
no, it's
meal.
McDonald's. No, you still have to pay for it.
Oh no, you still have to pay.
You
No,
still
come
have to
on,
pay.
some places will give you a free meal.
5% discount.
Oh, that's
5%
bullshit.
discount.
No, I want a free meal after 8 hours. That's not even asking enough.
You should be
8 hours?
grateful that you're getting
oh,
£15 an hour at this one specific location of the
This
country.
one specific country, indeed.
Oh,
And
you
on top of
hate
that,
me. I live in Canada.
you're getting the £15 an hour, and you think you're going to work 40 hours a week, but no. What happened is that at the beginning of that job, HR came in and handed us a document, and then we handed you that document, and you signed it, and it said that you waive your right to the 40-hour upper limit. So now you're actually working 60 hours for £15 an hour. There's no overtime here.
Interesting.
I'm telling you.
Your
No,
working rates are getting fucked up.
You'd be surprised the amount of stuff that people can get away with once they can get you to sign a piece of paper.
Mm-hmm.
Sign that.
There's literally like this haunted house in America, that's run by a former CIA guy. I'm not making this up. Who uses he used psychedelics to like torture people in the military, and he
Cool.
was affiliated with MK Ultra, actually. But what happened with this guy is that he opened a horror house that is free at entrance, and you get a $20,000 prize at the
Oh,
end.
let's go.
The thing is, no one's ever won the prize because they've come back and so beaten, bloodied, and traumatized from the experience, they never want to go there again.
I'm ready.
Wow.
I've been through it with my family. I can take it. This has
No, I'm
no.
pretty sure the CIA is another level.
Yeah, this
No.
CIA
is
is
like
next level.
awful. Like, you should read some of the stories of the women who've like gone through this experience. It's just
I
horrible.
think I saw something about some other similar house, but I don't know if it was CIA, but you paid to go in and you had to write this consent form like I consent to being beat up and shit. And they would do freaky shit.
And the connection to the point you were saying, Ray, about how if you can sign a piece of paper, people can do anything to you. This was like a 40-page consent paper, signing away all sorts of liabilities in case you died.
Wow.
You must really be seeking a scare thrill.
Well, I think
Yeah, I mean,
sometimes
if someone-
people just think it's, oh, well, I can endure a few hours of this and get $20,000.
Yeah, that is kind of a money hook, isn't it?
Yeah, and then they realize, of course, that they were never supposed to get the 20,000. It's going to be some kind of like ridiculous game.
Even my dumb ass is like, I don't know, 20,000. I could do it. Just the
It's just like,
CIA.
no, you cannot. These are the guys who wrote the Kubark manuals. You're not going to survive.
I'm the main character.
The main character.
This is your story, and we are all just side characters.
Right. What
I mean,
chapter?
speaking of the Kubark manuals, though, yeah, that is some crazy stuff. They should not sign those consent forms because, of course, the Kubark manuals, the stuff where these guys rationalize that they could like electrocute people within an inch of their life and all kinds of like crazy stuff like this. So, yeah, it's gonna be some weird stuff coupled with like psychological weirdness.
Wow. I never heard of the Kubark manuals before this.
Spelled Kubark, and it was like, I think it was in the 1960s and the 70s, perhaps the 80s. I can't remember what year it was, but either which way, the Kubark manuals were basically a bunch of stuff that I think if you attempted to do it openly now, it would all be illegal, which is why what you've got now is kind of like a watered down version of that, but then no one talks about it. But I'm pretty sure that there
You
were
just
people
talked
during the
about
war. Well, I mean, I just talked about it, but I mean, I'm pretty sure there are people at black sites during the War on Terror who were subjected to Kubark manual type stuff. Just, they don't document it when that happens.
Yeah, remember when all of those like right-wing British people were like, "Oh, waterboarding isn't so bad." And then one of them actually tried, and then they immediately recanted the position that waterboarding wasn't torture.
Exactly. It's one of those things that sounds innocent until you realize that the human body doesn't like having water poured in that particular way. It just doesn't like that.
Mm-hmm. They could only
more,
last.
because it's possible to do it without literally pouring water. It's possible to do waterboarding in a way where the body detects that the rag that has been stuffed into the mouth is putting water at the back of the person's throat, and so the human body thinks you're pouring water down the person's neck, but you're not actually doing that. And so you can actually get like the economized version of the enhanced interrogation technique.
Of
Oh, let's
course,
call it torture there. Silly
can't
me.
forget this is civility politics. You're not
Civility
allowed to
politics.
call it torture because that would be rude.
I remember they had me on that. Well, not they had me on that. We all had ourselves on that for years. Where basically, like from 2001 to like 2006 or something, like I seriously went around calling all of these things enhanced interrogation techniques. And every time someone would say the word torture, I'd be like, no, enhanced interrogation technique. And we're talking about stuff like throwing people through walls, putting a bag over their head and driving them to like a black site somewhere or something, and hitting them with hammers. All kinds of crazy stuff like this. It's like, no, this is not torture. This is an enhanced interrogation technique, which is designed to encourage them to be more forthcoming in their answers. And then, of course, later on, everyone's like, you know what? This is torture, and I think we probably need to call it that. It's torture.
Yeah.
So that was a whole trip. I mean, the political experience of like 2001 to 2006, like it's one of those things where a lot of people say you had to be there. You did have to be there to actually witness the hysteria of well, not even hysteria, but the almost calculated way in which everyone decided that, okay, we're doing a bunch of stuff. We don't want to use those words to describe those things. So we're going to invent new words to describe those things that we would have used those words to describe before. And voila, suddenly they are not happening. If I hit you with a hammer, that's not torture, it's enhanced interrogation. I'm trying to get answers, you're not giving them, and we're gonna get those answers. And so then we've also got the whole thing of we're having interrogation, so you have a sort of human resources what do you call those people again? Oh yes, Human Exploitation Battalion, which sounds extremely friendly. So you have your Human Exploitation Battalion, which is just asking questions we promise. I mean, what are we actually doing? What is 2001 to 2006, right? So this is, this is one of those things where we've, I think many of the people who during that time period learned the capacity to just reword stuff they didn't like. Some of that is still happening in different political contexts today. Where, like, for example, in the COVID-19 pandemic, some people who have not given up on just rewording things when they don't like it, instead of being like, we're gonna just let large numbers of people die, they're like, no, this is herd immunity, okay? Never mind that no one's actually gonna be immune at the end of it. It's herd immunity. It's herd immunity. It's not just letting people die. That's what they'll say every time. And so people who've been through the 2001 to 2006 rigmarole already familiar with this rewording game, not fooled by it.
Yeah.
Especially since so many of us like actively participated in this rewording game when it happened, because we thought, well, maybe this is normal. Maybe this is what happens, right? We just reword stuff. And then of course everyone woke up and some people woke up and were like, actually, this is abnormal and it needs to stop.
Mm-hmm. And then you have like Max Boot, who's like a refugee from. It's kind of crazy. He's like a refugee from the 2004, from the 2006 mindset, and he still believes everything the commentariat and the political establishment believed at the time, but the whole world has moved on around him and without him.
Exactly. And the thing is, one thing that should have forcibly moved people on that particular issue, I know this is well off topic of where we actually were, but one thing that should have moved people on from that issue, like, quite bodily, was that time when it came out that they had extraordinarily rendered, and by they I mean United Kingdom in this case, had extraordinarily rendered some guy through Egypt and then put him in Libya or something. And then when he got to Libya, they did things that were classically understood to be torture, like stuff like content warning for anyone who's listening anyway. This is only going to take about 20 seconds. It's content warning. So things that are classically described as torture, such as, again, hitting people with ball-peen hammers, literally ripping out people's fingernails, and so on and so forth. Okay, so end of the content warning. And so basically, things that would ordinarily be described as bad. These things were going on, and when they were happening in the black side, they weren't pretending it wasn't torture. They literally called it torture when it was there. It was only when he was back outside the black side that suddenly, it's enhanced interrogation.
Yeah.
So that should have exploded completely, this whole fiction from the very start, given that as soon as they're outside the legal jurisdiction of Western countries, suddenly the lexicon changes. Now it's just torture. Because you're in Libya.
Yeah.
Lady,
There was
ladies,
black sites in Syria as well.
I have a bit of an emergency here.
Okay,
I'm
what's going on?
out of coffee. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna mute. I'm gonna keep listening, and just don't mind me. You guys.
Oh, but the thing is, this was actually the point where I was going to ask everyone to give their final thoughts.
Oh, okay.
We're at 2 hours anyway.
Okay, I can hold off. I can hold off for you, just for you.
Aw, that's so generous. Would you like to give your final thoughts first, then, Heartless, as a special treat on Kier Starmer?
Final thoughts on this whole entire conversation? I don't know. I feel bad for everybody worldwide with the political systems in general. I think they're kind of bullshit. I don't really know exactly what solution we should do, but like I said earlier, the white vote kind of idea would be neat. If we could get enough people to be like, come on, guys, that'd be cool. As for the transphobia shit, I don't know. I still think if they're trying to push like hate on like even bisexual people now, I think that's a big mistake for them. So we just got to keep pushing there. Like in Canada, they've tried a few times to like slap random laws away or new ones down or whatever over scares, kids getting hormone replacement therapy and those kind of arguments. But it seems in Canada, it just people keep pushing back. Like people, they're like they have trans kids or friends or relatives or whatever, and they just they don't let it slide. So in Canada so far, it's been pretty decent, I think. Like, there's been jerks around, but I think if you just keep the pressure on them and keep a little bit of pressure on the government, like if you go to your governors or whatever in your area and you say, hey, like, you're not just like, hey, fuck you. You got to go in there like, hey, listen to me. This concerns me and my rights, and this is what I think. And, if you know medical professionals too, that helps. That could help back you up, like real activism kind of stuff. I don't know. I have faith. I'm an optimist. I don't want to burn everything down yet, but
Just yet.
just yet. But yeah, I'm hoping for better things, I guess.
Well, aren't we all? Now, Ray, would you like to give your final thoughts?
No. So, I mean, this has been a great conversation. Overall, I think you should collaborate more often. Collab is good, so we should do more of that. So, since I've been invited to your channel, next time around I'll invite you to mine. It's going to be fantastic, and probably make you
Wonderful.
like
I'd love to come.
a frequent guest as well, because you are cool and I like your input. So what I'll say is, of course, in my view, electoralism seems to have some like fundamental problems, particularly in the UK. So we've got 6 of those problems. Problems unrelated to Ronald McDonald this time. 1 to 6, I'd say the first one is there are structural pressures to select candidates that share the same mindset because they come from the same environments. So you've got basically lots of people who went to private schools such as Eton and so on, and they all have the same mindset, the same viewpoints, the same blind spots on how normal people conduct normal activities on a normal day. Therefore, you have weird out-of-touch ideas where they'll come out and tell you that you can just flag down a bus if you want to escape from corrupt police who are trying to murder you, or that somehow magically you can be jogging with your AirPods on and then you can like go through a shower and somehow you will then be able to get onto a bus. Very bizarre. So can't have these guys advising, can't have these guys making policy in their own closed echo chamber, because that's not going to build public infrastructure. In fact, they're refusing to build public infrastructure and talking about all this other stuff because they want to get away from that. Then you've got the second electoralism problem, which is that you've got lobby groups and other interest groups which have large influence over the selection process, perhaps sometimes more than actual voters because of their need for funding during party electoral activities. And so when you want a particular candidate, big donors will come in and say, guess what, you're going to be forced to actually have this other candidate instead, so you're just going to have to like live in hell world with Kirsten Sinema forever, etc., or you're going to have to like live with Joe Manchin on a boat called the Heavenly Yacht or whatever, and then he's just going to like force you to, I don't know, be dragged behind the boat or something because you're not going to be on the boat for long. And then you've got item 3, which is voters lack insufficient education, which in the case of the north of England, for example, yes, I've singled them out. I'm sure people are going to come and surface this audio eventually and say, I'm talking down at the people in the north of England. Well, I don't know what to say to them if on election night they saw Boris Johnson hiding inside of an actual refrigerator in order to avoid taking questions from the press and thought, that guy's the guy we need to vote for. So lack of education must be what's involved in that, because that's the most charitable thing I can come up with to explain how they can vote for the guy who avoided the press by hiding in a fridge. 4 out of 6, yeah. There's voters who hold ideological and common sense stances, and by common sense I mean quote unquote common sense stances that are actually at odds with what their own party stands for. So you've got, instances like people coming out explaining that they would support a mask mandate if not for the fact that their peers will think that they're less about freedom than they would like to be perceived as being about, and so therefore everyone has to die of COVID. Very crazy. So that needs to be dealt with in terms of like, people need to be said that it's okay to let go of stuff that doesn't make sense, and it's okay to like imagine that there are people or things that people can compare things to other than Adolf Hitler. Like bedtime is not Hitler, wearing masks is not Hitler, etc., etc. The cowardice of candidates who reflexively play into respectability politics. So you've got people who are committed to their own slogans about having nice behavior. For example, the Labour Party itself came up with this phraseology, a kinder, gentler politics, and then Conservatives were like, we're never going to do that, but we're going to hold you to it instead. And then, of course, you've also got the British media, which is, of course, staffed by the aforementioned persons who are within the same realm of candidates who are all in this large group of people who all went to private schools, and they're in revolving door situations. So, for example, the British Broadcasting Company, BBC News, is presently being operated by individuals who previously worked for the Conservative Party in their previous corporate communications existence. And so you've got this circle where they previously defended the Conservative Party as their actual job, and now when you fast forward 10 years, they're working for the totally unbiased corporation that's responsible for delivering news content to your home. And then people are surprised as to the fact that no matter what Boris Johnson does, he somehow gets like a clean way to skate out of the problem. It's because the people who are presenting the packages or designing or editing the packages that are presented as the news content previously worked directly for him. Unsurprising. And so this way the Labour leader enjoys being monstered every day. So, for example, Jeremy Corbyn could come out and say, for example, we will have flowers for everyone. And then you will discover actually by the next day, you've got a news package coming out talking about how Jeremy Corbyn is going to deforestize the entirety of planet Earth in order to make sure that all human beings shall have a flower. But has he considered that not every human being can have a flower, because otherwise the entire Earth would be destroyed and we would have enhanced levels of global warming due to an insufficient amount of flowers. In fact, bees would also die because they would have no way to pollinate, etc., etc. So, somehow you get from every child deserves a flower to Jeremy Corbyn is a literal monster. Like, this is where you end up when you have a British media that's basically staffed by people who used to be conservatives. So that's item 6. So that's basically my summary of the whole thing.
Well, I think that's a very thorough summary. I think that anyone would be amiss if they didn't tune in just for that there. It's a very thorough dissection of what's going on with Labour right now. I think that Jeremy Corbyn's loss provoked the wrong reaction in the Labour Party. Instead of looking at how they could appeal to the North, they made a bunch of assumptions based on some factions that were opposite to Jeremy Corbyn. And they thought, well, if we just do whatever was the opposite of what Corbyn thought, then we're sure to get elected, because obviously Corbyn didn't work. But that's not actually how things work. You need to approach the different people in the different ridings and figure out a platform that can win, but can also be as progressive as you can get in the various different ridings.
Exactly. The other thing is a basic matter. I just want to interject this one thing. I know this is summing up, but this is something I forgot to mention earlier.
Sure.
Which is when
I will allow this interjection.
Thank you. And so when they refuse to learn in the way that you're talking about there, and they go in the other direction and say, okay, what if we just became more like the Conservatives in order to compete against Conservatives? They don't get respected for that, because it just means that they look weak because they decided to be like the other party. And then, of course, as someone once put it so succinctly, if they're trying to vote for Conservatives, why would they vote for Keir Starmer's weird knockoff version import of conservatism, as opposed to just voting for the real thing?
Mm-hmm. There's no possible reason why anyone would choose Keir Starmer. If you genuinely had those sort of social conservative, patriotic beliefs, why would you vote for Keir Starmer when you could just vote for Boris Johnson, who does them better and has been loud about it his whole life?
Yeah.
Like, no one wants your diet Tories.
Exactly.
And I think that Labour is doomed to a death spiral, and a result that could even be worse than their 2019 one, if they don't remove Keir Starmer, as they did actually. In between 1992 and 97, there was a failed Labour leader that was removed because he had garbage ideas and no real strong personality. I think that we should use this time where he's seeming to be setting himself up against the membership, setting himself up against the vast majority of progressive people in the UK, and offering a version of the UK's, a version of himself, or a version of leadership that is mainly preoccupied with contradiction and prostitution, or what's the word? Basically just kind of bowing down and surrendering to conservative ideology, but still framing it in a sort of a centristy way. That's something with limited electoral appeal. And it's something with limited personal appeal as well, as Keir Starmer's falling polling and approval numbers will suggest. So if Labour wants to form a new government, it should eject Keir Starmer as fast as they possibly can.
Yeah.
And thank you, everyone, for this call. I really did enjoy this call. Oh, hey, Josh. Nice to see you signing in there at the very end of the stream. I know this was at a sort of a late hour of the night, but I really did enjoy getting a chance to talk to the two of you. Feel free to come on again. I'm thinking this is going to be a weekly thing, maybe Saturday or Sunday, but I'm going to do calls with all sorts of people. And you'll be more than welcome back as guests whenever you wish.
Yeah, no
Sounds
problem.
good to me.
I would certainly be happy to be brought back. Also, there's one other thing I want to mention as well. You talked about this polling business. Yeah, I mean, he said he was going to be 20 points ahead. Where is he now? He's like, I mean, literally, they did a thing the other day, a polling the other day, and he came back at like -8 or something.
Yeah.
Like, and of course, I made the joke that, okay, he said 20 points, but I mean, he didn't say which direction, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
maybe he meant 20
it
points
could be ahead
under.
in a negative sense, right? It could be a negative integer. Maybe when he's -20, he'll declare victory.
Oh, yeah. Well, that is, yeah. Josh, you had your priorities straight. That does sound very interesting, and hopefully you'll be able to tell me all about it.
CK3.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you all for tuning in. I had a wonderful time. Good night and best wishes. And I think Keir Starmer is a bit of a wanker.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Agreeable end note.
Ta-ta for now.